Hey folks, welcome back to the Meta Abuse podcast. I'm your host, BattleMode, and we've got co-hosts Sean and LucidTactics today.
Hey guys.
How are we?
Going pretty well. We've got a really interesting topic today. We're going to be talking about the concept of scaling and snowballing in strategy games. And just so you know, the idea of snowballing is it means different things in different game genres. So I think we're probably going to constrain this mostly to the strategy genre because the word snowballing actually means something completely different when you're talking about things like action games and arcade games. But that's something we can probably talk about another day. Lucid, do you want to define how you feel scaling means in terms of strategy games? Because I think it's good to get the definition locked down first.
Yeah, so we'll be talking, I think, mostly about strategy games. We might mention like a few other things because I think like one of the most fun parts of almost any kind of game is getting more powerful, right? Like if you think about it in a strategy game, you're making decisions between different things, and like over time, you want to basically be like increasing in power. Like that's a lot of fun. Like that's one of the reasons ARPGs are really fun. It's one of the reasons Civilization is really fun. It's one of the reasons that Age of Wonders is fun because you start off with like a little spearman, but by the end you've got like a dragon or something, like these things are fun. It's fun getting more powerful. And part of the fun part of a strategy game is figuring out the fastest, best, or most fun way to get more powerful. And if you think about like Dominions, you start off with these like tiny little squads, and by the end you're managing an army of like several thousand. It's fun. So I think like as a game grows, like as you generate more power, either your units are getting better, or you're getting more units, or you're getting better research. And I think there's a couple questions that we're going to try to tackle in today's podcast. One is, as a game scales, how can it stay fun? Because the controls, like the game UI controls that you use to manage a squad of like 4 people, are potentially a lot different than the game UI controls you manage an army of like several thousand. And if you're stuck trying to manage several thousand units with the controls that you would use to manage 4 units, it's probably going to suck. So I think that's one of the questions. I think the other question is like, if the enemy is like, let's say this is the enemy power level, right? If it's like this, right? And it's like going way above yours, then like, is this fun? Like if they're just like hopelessly ahead of you where you have no shot at ever fighting them, it's like you can't catch up. That's, it's potentially not fun. Like you can imagine like a MOBA game like Dota or League of Legends or something where the enemy team is so far ahead of you, there's just nothing you can do. Like the game, you're ready for the game to end at that point. Like it's not really very fun. So I think there's this kind of weird thing, which is where we know in games that like scaling and progression are fun, but we also know that when there's too big of a difference, like this could be really fun, right? Like if you're scaling like that, that might be really fun. But if there's too big of a difference, it's not fun, So I think there's a lot to talk about, because I think different games, we were talking a little bit before we started recording, different games have different ways that they handle scale, like power progression and scaling. And I think some are bad and some are good. And then some are just different. So it's going to be fun.
And also player perceptions of snowballing is an interesting topic because, snowballing can be framed in the sense of, well, especially in multiplayer games, it'll often be talked about in terms of, one player has gotten too powerful, therefore the game is no longer fun because they scaled up too quickly. And especially in 4X games or strategy games where there's resource management, or territory acquisition, therefore more resource management, therefore larger armies. This is your classic snowballing thing. But often in single player games, that's part of the fun, as you said, right? And so managing snowballing is a controlled thing. Like that the snowballing's got to happen, because if you don't have any power scaling, if you don't feel powerful, I think games where, especially in 4X like games, you want to be managing this big empire, right? You want to have lots of units or lots of more powerful units. and you want to have some ability to, to project this power. And so certain games, there can be often, I think, a conflict between multiplayer games design and single player games design. And often the complaints that certain multiplayer games will, or gamers of multiplayer games will have, when erroneously applied to single player, really, really nerf the fun levels in a big way. And we see this a lot in modern games, actually. So yeah, I think this is a good topic because this is a games design topic without a doubt. I've been talking about this loads on my own channel recently. This and adjacent topics, and this ties into a whole lot of other stuff that we can talk about, I think. So it's a big topic, and I'm looking forward to talking about it.
So maybe what might be good to talk about is the naive approach to fixing this is what I will call putting rails on the game. And let me see. So number one is rails. And so I think if you put rails on the game, what we're looking at is basically saying at every point there you have decisions to make. Like, let's say there's buildings you could build in Civilization or something, right? And you have choices, but all the choices are pretty good, right? Like they're balanced, they're very well balanced choices, and you just this is kind of like a rate at which you're going to progress. And if everybody's faced with a lot of choices they can make, then the growth of all the people will be pretty much the same. Like there's not a huge difference in progression and scaling because you put the game on rails, I feel like Civilization sort of does that a bit, like I think a lot of times when you get games with like somewhat symmetric resources, like Endless Legends sort of does it. You have like Fidzy and stuff. But I think like the more you try to have like, okay, there's 4 different types of resources. Each building makes a certain number of them. Either one resource is like the best, then everybody sort of goes after that, or like, basically the more balanced all the choices are, and the more symmetric all the choices are that the different factions or nations or players have, then like the more the power levels are just going to be coupled together essentially. Like basically the more asymmetric and different the choices are, and the more wildly different the strategies you can use are, the more these things can diverge. But if you have really tightly balanced things, then they're going to be coupled together.
So I feel that if everything else is equal, if all things being equal with the system you're describing, then you're really down to assuming that your game is somehow procedurally generated or there's some randomization of where players start. It's going to be down to who starts where. It's
Sure.
Positioning and the random generation of the map is what's going to determine the game. All other things being equal, right? So when you're talking about games being on rails, I see what you mean there. There's also a related topic as well where we've got kind of what I would call arbitrary restraining bolts. Okay, so for example, Civ 5 tried to fix the problem of snowballing by just limiting the amount of cities you could have, and it wasn't you can only have 5 cities, but
right.
And I often say that as a hyperbolic thing. Like Civ just lets you just have 3 cities now, but it kind of it felt a little bit like that, because if you go from Civ 3, which was put cities everywhere and build everything in them,
yeah,
and that some people didn't enjoy that kind of gameplay. But then, in Civ 4, Civ 4 had a better way of handling it, actually. But then Civ 5, really, they put this happiness mechanic in it, which I think we were talking about this before the start of the game, where it kind of gives you you can make a choice, kind of, between building multiple cities, playing wide or playing tall. So not strictly tall, where you just have one city, but, like 1 or 2, and building those up more so they're more productive, rather than spreading yourself wider over a wider territory. That's an interesting choice, right, if it's done correctly. But I feel that sometimes these on-rails gameplay, as on-rails power scaling, as Lucid's calling it, coupled with arbitrary scaling mechanics, is a real big arbitrary restraining bolts, where the players complain about something in a genre or in a game, developers go, okay, we need to fix that, and then they just add something gamey in there, like, okay, well, here's a hard limit to X. Okay, you can only gain 5 gold per turn because people are getting too much gold. That's an example, right? It feels really unsatisfying, and it's very lazy. And it shows that, generally, in my opinion, it shows that a game the designers haven't had enough time to cook the game at the base level, because they should have thought about this at the start. Do you know what I mean? And often these ad hoc. Sorry, Lucy, go ahead.
I think these things also exist in like action RPGs, like the same restraint system. You know, it's like a level cap. You can't go higher than this level till you leave the region and go to the next region. You know, there's like different things that, okay, no, this is where you're going to be at this portion of the game. So. I think that, and the happiness mechanics in Civ 5, I think, are a great example of this kind of like restraint in thinking, and it's easy to see how you get there, right? Because it's like, we know that if you want to play a 4-hour game, I'll do a purple one here. If you want to play a 4-hour game, and one nation starts going like this, there's no point playing the rest of it, right? Because we're out of the fun zone. Everybody else is so far behind. So. Yeah. You have to do something to address it, and then you end up putting these caps in. I think the problem is like, these aren't, like, I think these tend to be less fun, because like the problem with Rails is, if you do Rails, it feels like your decisions don't matter. Like, okay, I'm just going through and playing the game. Like, it's not like if I don't have the ability with a ton of skill, like if there's not a way to do a lot of skill expression where like I'm an advanced player and I can go like this, and a new player is only going to go like that, you know, then like, why am I playing?
Yep, I agree. Although this is leading into a conversation about, you know, games kind of being made more for new players and designed heavily for new players over those with legacy skill, but that's kind of an adjacent topic. I think with, you know, really, you know how there's this concept in engineering where there are, and let's talk about a car engine, right? My friend's an engineer, and he was saying that, you know, when they're developing car engines, they know that at some point there is going to be a part of that engine that's going to fail, okay? And it's important for them to be able to predict which part of the engine is going to fail. So you have a kind of form of designer obsolescence. You know, well, I forget what the term is now, but yeah, you design your engine so that there are predictable failure points, and those, you know, assuming that you're a reputable car manufacturer, you try to make those replaceable parts the ones that are less expensive, and you know, okay. So, and I think in terms of 4X games, you've got to, when you're designing them, you have to predict where the snowballing and scaling issues can come in. And you either eliminate them completely, or you build your game so that scaling and snowballing is is tied into all the mechanics, and everything is built around that. So you have some natural way, or a natural feeling limit for scaling. Okay, so I've been talking about this game called Emperor of the Fading Suns recently a lot. One of the Emperor of the Fading Suns, very briefly, is like a 5-player multiplayer game. You can play against the AI too, but it's got multiple mechanics in there that the developers really thought about to ensure that things like snowballing was limited. So the reason why this is important in this game is because it's a terrestrial 4X, but also you can colonize other planets. So it's like a small game of civilization, except on multiple planets. Now that sounds like the kind of, you know, so you start on one planet, then you can send your spaceships with your engineers to build cities on other planets. Now, normally that is going to raise alarm bells for anybody who knows what that means, because it's like, whoa, this game is going to scale exponentially almost immediately, especially if you've got the capability of being able to build infinite engineer, you know, like you can build 2 or 3 engineers a turn, right? So you could potentially go and colonize a whole bunch of planets. They thought about this. So part of the lore of the game is that technology is actually really, really old. It's really rare, and so spaceships are, every player in the game only has a handful of ships, and getting this technologies to be able to build more spaceships only comes very late in the game, and you have to really build hard towards it. So it's a very natural limitation on what you can do. Like, you can use your spaceships to go and colonize other planets, but if you do that, you know, you're not going to be using them for other things like defending your worlds. So there's this wonderful, careful, and really considered anti-snowballing mechanic in there, But there's also other stuff in the game as well. We'll talk about it as we come to it. But that game's a masterclass in understanding how scaling and snowballing can be problematic or fun, and it handles both really, really well. And I think there's very few games now. I mean, even Dominions has got some problems, like for example, with the whole problem of coalitions. And in multiplayer, it can be a little bit unfun when four players gang up on one person. They take them out of the game. They divide their territory up between them, and then you've got 4 players left, and then 3 of them attack the next one. And in the multiplayer community, people try to get around this in various ways, but it's always an omnipresent threat. Okay, Emperor of the Fading Suns actually dealt with that as well because of the way that the victory condition works, and it makes it, without going into detail, it essentially it dissuades people from doing that, because what you get from a coalition is very, very different. It's not attractive, and actually invading an enemy world is really difficult, even for multiple players. And it's so risky because you don't have that many ships, right? And if you lose your ships, you're in big trouble. So this they've thought about these things. And the point I want to make with all this is that I think your game needs to predict where these scaling issues are going to come, or these snowballing issues are going to come, and you encourage it where it's needed, because you need the game to end at a certain point, right? So you encourage it where it's needed, and you add the double win mechanics and all this kind of stuff in order to hurry the end of the game when a player is clearly going to win. But you prevent it, like at the start, as a natural. For example, with that game, it's got the potential to be an exponential growth, exponential amount of units that you got to manage, just completely mind-boggling complexity. And they've handled that. Dominions has got its own way of handling that too. And I think, we've got to consider these things. And I think a good developer will consider these. What you don't want is the developer not considering this when they're designing the game, which is what happens 9 times out of 10. And then they have to go in later on and do what I call band-aid game design, where they just throw new mechanics in there, arbitrary scaling caps, and these like trying to paper over the cracks of this structural flaw that they've just not thought about. And players go, oh well, this is not fun because XYZ. And then they go, oh, okay, well, now we're going to have to, we'll just add a load of stuff. And by the way, we'll use it as an excuse to sell some DLC too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think those are good points. I think you kind of hinted at one thing, which we haven't talked about yet, which I guess I'll go ahead and add here, which is like diplomacy as a way of managing scaling, right? So if you think about Dominions, it's a game with I forgot to do numbers here. If you think about Dominions, it's a game with a huge amount of scaling. Like you go from managing a few squads of 10 to managing multiple armies of 1,000, and you go from having one province to having a couple hundred potentially in a really big game. So it's a game with a ton of scaling. The way this basically gets held in check is diplomacy, right? Like if you get too big, then people will team up on you and attack you. So this is like, just by having this, I mean, you could do this with AIs. If you had AIs realizing somebody's getting too far ahead, and then they team up and attack you, but then once you start getting beat down, maybe you diplo your way out or something, right? So this is something totally available in single player as well, but humans just do it naturally in a free-for-all setting in a multiplayer environment. But there's problems with it too, which is that early game, especially like in Dominions, like you get teamed up on by 4 people, you almost don't get a voice. You just get like eliminated. And that sort of exists through the whole game. You can kind of fix some of that by map design and making it where it's easier to defend yourself and you can't get attacked by like 4 people. But otherwise it's pretty tough. So, but this is, I think, the interesting thing about diplomacy as a way to manage scaling is that you can have things which are intrinsically very fun. You can have things where like, oh no, I'm going to shoot up like this, but then people realize you're shooting up and they all attack you and you start like dive bombing until you get maybe beat down, and then you have to like try to work your way back up.
Yep.
That's fun, and it feels like the decisions matter, and it doesn't feel like the game doesn't feel like it's on rails, because like it was going to go to this very different future, but then the players in the game or it could be the AI in the game decided to stop you, and now we're in this state.
By the way, you can simulate this in video games if your rule set is simple enough. So with single player, so you don't necessarily need to have multiplayer if you design your game that if you design it around this idea. So the classic example is the original of Master of Orion. The reason why that game's still so great today partly is because it's got a very coherent victory condition. So the victory condition in Master of Orion is such that it's a space 4X game. You conquer planets, you settle planets, you build them up, and then you bump up with your neighbors, and then you eye their territory up. Now, the way that the game is won is that the two players with the highest populations and population by planet, they get nominated for a vote, and every certain amount of turns. And so this is an interesting thing because it's also an anti-snowballing mechanic, but I will explain this. So the rest of the players in the game, AI players, will then vote for whoever they like the most. And what happens is if you've got more of the population in your territory, you get more votes, okay, and you can vote for yourself. But if you snowball too quickly, if you power scale too quickly in Master of Orion, theoretically, then let's say that you suddenly get a lot more powerful than everybody else. The other players can and will vote you out of the game. So you can lose, like if somebody else is like, let's say that you are one of the two nominees, but you've pissed everybody off because you've rapidly expanded your territory, then the AI, the other players are not going to like you because they see you as a threat. It's programmed to see you as a threat, and it will vote for the other player. So if you scale too quickly, you're going to lose the game. You've got to play the diplomacy game. So diplomacy is core and critical, central to that game's design. You have to play the diplomacy, and it forces the player to engage carefully in a mixed, diplomatic stroke warfare approach to expanding their empire. It's not just there to pay the other players off, so with a bit of money to pacify them until you're ready to defeat them, like it is in 99% of 4X games. How it is that the first genre of the example of the genre got this right and no game ever since has managed to get it right is beyond me. But it's really taken a game like Dominions to come along where people have been able to inject organic diplomacy, and this natural diplomacy that kind of arises when intelligent autistic nerds play Dominions, right? They come into this game and they want to win, and you see this wonderful organic, this power struggle come out. But to simulate that in a game is really, really hard. It's a not trivial problem, and yet somehow Syntax in 1993 or whatever it was managed it. They figured it out. And that game is still great today, especially remnants of the precursors, because that was that's the game as it's intended to be played, because all the bugs are gone and all the little exploits are gone. If you go and play that now, you'll see just how clever that game's design is. And they really thought about this. How do we stop the player from just rapidly expanding and winning the game? Well, okay, but you've got to do it carefully, because if you piss off the other players and you're not quite big enough to defeat them all, then you're gonna lose the vote. So it's you've got to build these systems into your game at the core level. You don't just bolt on diplomacy afterwards and hope that fixes the problem. It's not going to work. You've got to all of your everything from the victory condition downwards. The victory condition is the key in that game, and then every other system that is in the game fully supports the player's ability to work within the mechanics that you've got in order to achieve victory. But what's built in is it's built in to avoid scaling and snowballing too. A very, very clever games design.
I also feel like diplomacy, I think a lot of game developers don't really know what it's for. I think you'll have it where it's either just world building, where they're trying to be oh, this nation likes heat environments and you like cold, so y'all are enemies and they're going to have a malice towards you. Or oh, it's just a way to trade, and it's that we want to have a world that you can trade in or something. It's they don't really understand the reason it's there. And I think if you play a free-for-all game with humans, you realize the reason diplomacy's there. Yeah, you have trading and other stuff, but the main reason is it keeps it lets you have a fun game where the decisions you make are extremely meaningful and you have the ability to spiral out of control, but diplomacy is there to clamp that back down. And I think if you understand that as a developer, then it's much more likely you're going to make like a good game that uses diplomacy correctly. But I think you're right. I think like hardly any developers do this.
There's an example. I want to bring Sean in on this because Sean's been playing a game a little bit that I've tried a little bit and I quite liked. And it's a RTS game, actually. It's kind of a cross between an RTS and a 4X called Dune Spice Wars. And this game made a big effort to tie, diplomatic gameplay into even a single player game. It's a multiplayer game too. But Sean knows a bit more about this game. Sean, can you explain how diplomacy is kind of central to how the victory conditions and the sort of overall gameplay is?
Oh, I know this one. Yeah, okay. So there's a whole other it's an RTS, but it's actually quite difficult to win by direct means. You have to really try. There's a lot of barriers that get in the way. There's financial barriers, and there's barriers with the world essentially trying to kill you every time you leave your home and that sort of thing. So there's barriers there, but then there's also diplomacy. You've got to engage with the Landsraad, which is like a council, and they do a vote every so many days. I can't remember how many days it is, but they do a vote, and there'll be various things, various actions that come up that you can vote for. And you need to weight your vote a certain amount to have a chance of winning it. And you can either vote for yourself to get it, or you can vote for everyone to get it, or you can try and block it so that nobody gets it, or you can even try and manipulate it so that another party gets hit with it if it's like a negative effect, like say military units upkeep is increased by 50%, something like that. So you can try and play it against against an opponent to weaken them in some way for the next period. And then also, even if you do build up a big army and you want to roam around and you want to try and blow stuff up, which is again quite difficult to do, there's a lot of espionage. There's background stuff. There's like espionage. You can actually assassinate leaders because you can employ assassins, and you can start basically like a sleeper cell in another faction's territory. And then you can start formulating this assassination operation, and then they can also then form a counterintelligence operation and try and find out where your assassins are hiding and kill your assassins. So there's a whole lot of like intrigue and political like stuff going on in the background. And I've run into ones. There was I think I got assassinated by I think it was the Harkonnens or something, because I was winning. I was doing really well with Choam. Like you can get a financial victory if you own a certain amount of shares from Choam, and I was well on the way to doing that. And then I think it was the Harkonnens hit me with an assassination operation, and I was trying to find them, but I was still trying to figure out how the mechanic worked, because I don't like to look up guides for this kind of thing. I like to try and figure it out. And I'm sitting here trying to figure it out, and they got me. They killed my leader, and my whole faction was gone. So there's some very hard counters to just straight out military expansion. I really, really like it, actually. I think it's a really interesting take on a strategy game.
So they've really kind of leaned into the idea that at the macro level of the game's design, it's more like a board game where there are hard counters for various things. There's multiple systems that you've got to be kind of thinking about. There's the ability that there's the potential that you might get assassinated. You've got to be careful of the nuclear weapons later in the game. You also have to be careful of losing territory in the classic 4X way, because you can get attacked in various ways and lose your resources. But it does have what I would call sort of arbitrary feeling limitations on stuff, like for example, but it's kind of law based. So for example, in Dune, they try to make it so that it's not like you can't kite people in that game, really. You can kind of build, like the reason being is because when you leave your base, as Sean said, you start running out of water. So water is a resource, and what this effectively is, it's a timer on your units that prevents them from being able to fight for long periods of time. So you're encouraged, to just go and click on an enemy unit, and your units move up together. They stand next to each other and they start shooting at each other, and the one with the most units wins. I don't much like it, because for me, an RTS game you should be able to kite a little bit. You can't really do that in Dune Spice Wars, but at least they made the effort to try to tie it in a thematic way. You know, they're like, okay, well, we've got water because Dune's dry, everyone has to recycle their water, so you know, this is their way of getting around the attention as a resource thing in RTS. They wanted it to be more of a macro level game. You know, they don't really want people kind of like trying to spend ages like fighting, having players essentially bypassing some of these great mechanics they've come up with on the macro level by just basically raffle stomping everybody with excessive skill and snowballing on the military micro level of things. And so I think it's an interesting game because they've clearly thought about it in those multiple ways. Whether it works or not, I'm not sure, but
there's
there's other games that have done it too, like Civ. I mean, if you think about it, like Civilization put in all these different paths for victory, right? So like, oh, you could have, I think this is related, right? Because there's like the assassination layer of the game, there's the research layer of the game, there's the military layer of the game, there's the finance layer of the game. So that seems to be like another thing. I don't know if it's like it's sort of adjacent to scaling, but it's related. Is like maybe this is your military curve, but maybe this is your assassin curve, and somebody else's assassin curve is like this. And so they're like, you're crushing them on military, but they're crushing you on assassination prevention, doing whatever.
The AI has got to be able to play all these things. This is the problem with multiple. Sorry, just very quickly, with multiple difficulty settings, or sorry, multiple victory conditions, is they've got to be linear enough together. You know, that the AI can play them, because this multiple victory conditions are the bane of 4X, and it's a very rare game. Civ was a rare. This is why it's really difficult to recapture the fire of the original Civ games, because they got that balance right. They managed to figure out a way of getting the AI to reasonably try to play these multiple victory conditions where everybody's kind of playing a different game, yet in a sort of believable way. Sorry, Sean.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, referring back to Spice Wars, because there's so many different victory conditions, you do get the AI playing for different conditions. Like you'll get one going for a diplomatic victory, one going for a financial victory, and then you'll get one, and then you'll get a dumbass like me who gets to the late game and thinks, hey, what happens if I nuke someone? And then you nuke someone and you're just an instant pariah and the land's rat, and you basically just, you know, that's it, you're done. So there's certain ways that you can heavily shortcut your progress, but they do all play different games, so it's quite interesting.
I think it was Civ 5 that was the first. It could have been 4, but wasn't it Civ 5? Wasn't that the first one where they put in like true different victory conditions? Like you can win through culture, you can win through finance, you can win through research, you can win through conquest. Wasn't? Am I wrong?
That was in. I think that was in the original. I mean, you can do the technology.
The original, you conquered the world, man. The original, it wasn't like, I don't think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Let me pull it up in a separate window. Civ 2 definitely had multiple victory conditions. You could win through. Yeah. You could win by launching the rocket to space. I think that was in the original Civ as well, actually. So you could. It was a technological victory which allowed where you colonize Mars. Then you had but I don't think cultural victory wasn't a thing until Civ 5, maybe. That might have been I think some of the victory conditions came in later. What is notable... Yes, Civ 1 had Conquest, where you defeat all rival civilizations, and Spaceship, where you're the first to go to space.
But Civ 5 was notable for the first... excuse me, for being the first Civ game where they basically gave up on the AI trying to win. So they realized that the AI couldn't play the game, and... So, because of the multiple victory conditions, presumably, I'm speculating here, but I think this is what happened. So they actually kind of came out and said, look, the game, you know, when people ask them, the AI doesn't actually try to win now. It just plays the game, and you can technically lose if you do nothing, but it won't try to win. It won't like push victory conditions. It will set itself a victory condition based on the personality of the leader or something. And it will look like it's trying to do that, but it's really just there to provide stimulus for the player to play. And I hated that. As soon as like, you know, when you peek behind the curtain and you can see, like, you know, you see this wonderful magic trick, but you're the guy standing at the side of the stage and you can see what he's doing, and then you're like, okay, now the illusion's broken. As soon as they told us that the illusion of Civ was broken, so I never bothered with another Civ game after that. I was just like, I don't want to play that kind of game. Like I feel like they've spoiled it for me. Slightly adjacent topic, but you know what I mean.
I do think asymmetric zones is probably in net like a good tool to have for 4X games, not for victory conditions. I feel like this asymmetric victory condition where you like win through having a certain amount of money or score or whatever, I feel like those systems are almost always garbage. I do think having different zones like an assassination layer, a research layer, like these things can be really interesting because it provides a way for you to have like really hard scaling, which is fun, right? Where you're like going like this in military and you think you're winning, but then somebody comes and they just kill all your leaders, right? Even though their military is down here. And then they start using that to win. So it's a way for players to pivot. So it's like, oh crap, this guy's running away with military. How can I pivot and maybe pull myself back in? And that, that's a way to do that. So I think it's a kind of cool idea, but I think the victory condition approach to this is often garbage.
I think that we've got to get this right at the games design level. So the reason why I like Emperor of the Fading Suns, and I'm talking about this one a lot, is because in this, like, it looks like a 4X game, but it doesn't really do you a whole lot of good to try to build a huge roaring economy and build massive amounts of armies, because you are limited to some extent with the amount of ships that you can build. So you can never really like alpha strike all of your enemies' planets at once, not until the end game anyway. Now there is one of the players in the game, or one of the houses, is sort of by default set up to be better at that kind of gameplay where you do the map painting thing. But the problem is with that is in a multiplayer game, when you start getting too powerful, because it's a vote-based game, and the way that you win the game is basically you have each player has 5 votes, which are physically represented in the game by a unit, this scepter unit, and so every time, and then there's 2 NPC factions which also have these votes, and there's a perfect, I think it's 35 altogether, and you can occasionally find a vote in a ruin. It's like a goodie hut, that you can pick up, which is a real big, powerful thing. But the way that the votes work is that, if somebody's starting to take too much territory and they're looking like they're going to start running away with the game, the other players are going to start voting against them. So you have this regent position, which is the precursor to winning the game. You get voted in as the regent, and then if you can survive 2 more votes as the regent, then you become the emperor and you win the game, right? But the regent also has the power to assign ministries to other players, and it's a way of gifting these one of 3 very, very powerful stations that gives you big bonuses. For example, one is the fleet commander, which gives you access to more ships, which is dead rare in the game. The other one is the garrison commander, which gives you access to this army that is on a planet that's fighting an alien horde off, right? And you can kind of take those troops away from that job, that important job, to go and help with your own conquest. But the problem is then the aliens get loose, right? So it's just so well made. So if you're starting to scale out of control, as a player, because you've done really well with the economy, you've maybe, you figured out a way to get more of your ships out, so you've got more planets, more stuff. It doesn't always necessarily work just to kind of like try to do the classic 4X snowball thing, because not only have you got the other players who are going to work against you if you start visibly getting too strong, but there's other things like you can't vote at all if you've not got a unit called a noble on the home world, where all the voting takes place. So if you're about to win the game, for example, the players can assassinate your noble on the home world, and that will stop you from voting completely. So even if you've accumulated more of the scepters by conquering another player, taking their scepters or something, so you've got more votes and more power essentially in the game, there's still other ways that the other players can just take you out because you've not defended yourself you can't defend yourself everywhere. You see what I mean? So it's just so well thought out, and I love this. I want more games to build this kind of stuff in at the core level. Think about these things first. Figure out where players can potentially scale. I think with Emperor of the Fading Suns, the designers had the benefit of 3 previous games or something. I can't remember what the first one was called, but then there was Machiavelli the Prince, which was a very famous game back in the day as well. And it was a diplomacy-based kind of 4X-ish sort of trading kind of game. And then Emperor of the Fading Suns was this kind of this grand strategy sort of like a 4X type thing, but they always included the lessons that they'd learned on their previous games. So they'd found out that that coalitions were a problem in that game, in their earlier games. So they gave you 5 scepters, because if there's 5 players and 4 players gang up on one person, well, then they've got to divide 5 scepters between the other 4 players, and someone who always gets one more. And there's some other stuff as well, like the way that the map's laid out. You can't really divvy up territory between people because it's all so disjointed from other people's territory. Just can't defend it. Super clever games design.
Yeah, I think map layout's super important too. Like, I think Dominions, if it had better like map generation defaults for like that made it harder. I mean, you can kind of do that. Like, there actually is sort of a setting for like vanilla map gen to do a donut map.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is like a hyper aggressive map style.
It's brutal.
Yeah, but
I got wrecked.
But yeah,
I got wrecked in the tournament, man.
Oh yeah. Oh, you're out already. You and I haven't.
I was out
talking.
before I started, man.
Oh really? Shit. Who to Detour? Who took you out?
I got rushed by an Ind player with just endless sacred. The Ind stuff, basically the warrior priests. I had a bad start. I was next to my friend Kale. He was on the other side, and so I had at least some kind of like I knew he wouldn't immediately attack me. But yeah, anyway, that's a conversation for another time. I got wrecked.
Yeah. Okay, that's funny. One thing I want to bring up here is level scaling. I think I'd written that down earlier on here, but so in a lot of RPG games, you have level scaling where it's like, oh, like the zone you go to is going to determine the kind of monster, but then sometimes they adjust them to whatever your level is. That way it's always like a fun challenge.
Yeah.
I think Diablo does this to a degree, like Diablo 4 did that. I don't really remember all the different things, but I think in general it's something players don't like. And I think part of the reason is it's like immersion breaking, world breaking. It's like, wait, how is it that this wolf is now like level 50 and like a demigod? Like just so that it gives me some challenge. Like generally, I think in general having different zones that have monsters of a certain tier and whatever, and they don't get better, that's just how they are. Like in an RPG setting, I think that's usually like a much better way. But then you have like weird things where you have somebody speed running you through the game because they're level 60 and they come help you through like level 20 stuff. But then you have weird things in Diablo where you have like a mixed party, but the lower level guy is doing more damage.
Yeah.
Because they're doing all this weird math so that it's like, okay, he's fighting a level 20 wolf, but that same wolf for you is level 40. And because of how the scaling and the choices you've made or whatever, like you do less damage than the level 20 guy.
I mean, this is really crunchy game mechanics that are fun for people to figure out. But I think, this is an MMORPG thing, I think. The first time I remember stuff like that, I think was like Phantasy Star Online on the Dreamcast. Like in 1999 or something. It was 2000. I'm sure that had a similar system. Then you got the sort of related thing, which was it Oblivion or Daggerfall? One of those early Bethesda games where the level scales depending on how you. That's right. The difficulty of the game scales with the level up. So people figured if you don't level, but you just get better magic items, you can finish the game really easily because you never level up.
Yeah.
There's a way of getting around it. Was it Daggerfall or was it?
I think Oblivion did it.
Was it Oblivion? Yeah.
I think it did.
I never knew that.
Sure. Yeah.
I finished it twice. I never knew that.
It's a strange thing. I think in general it's bad. And I think you can apply this to strategy games too, right? Like you could be like, okay, well, how much cheating is the AI going to get? You could have it fixed so that it's always within 20% of your total income, right? So that like if you have more money than them, you'll have more, but you'll never have more than 20% more because it's going to give them a cheat bonus or something that is going to scale based off how strong you are. So if you're going like this in the game, you're like starting to arc up, the AI will be like, oh, okay, well, we're just going to arc up too because that's how the AI is coded with the cheating. So
a lot of strategy games made this mistake and people hate it. Like I remember I was talking to BATTLEMODE about this. He always hates scaling difficulty settings. Here's one of the problems with this, by the way, is that when you're like at this level, what does that mean in a game where the difficulty scales, to your ability? Like you like let's say you're playing like Eodor or something, right? Like a basic goblin is and it's like whatever level, it's going to be like this level of challenge, right? And then you got an orc here, and then it's going to be here, and then you got a dragon, and it's going to be up here. You kind of know where you are in the game. It's easy to read, But when you've got this scaling thing, you don't know what the frick's going on. Like you at
But you
any
get
point.
weird stuff like, what does a level 40 wolf mean? You know, like how is that one hit killing my warrior? Like,
Yeah.
what does that mean?
I was gonna say
It's
with
immersion
the
breaking.
yeah. I was gonna say with the scaling and how the AI sort of cheats and puts limits on stuff. There was that it's another Shiro Games title, War Tales. It does that with the combat, and that it puts a whole bunch of like chokes on things. Like when you go into combat, you can do that thing where you can have the normal levels or the normalized levels where everything's the same level as you. And I think basically everybody went with the one that doesn't leave you with the same levels. But when you go into combat, the AI will just be like, we're going to give you however many troops you have plus one, and it just drops that in there, and it's kind of annoying.
Mhm.
It makes it hard to, it makes it quite difficult to deal with until it sort of gates you, because you have to start crafting better gear at the beginning before you can start going fighting, say, medium difficulty patrols, and then you need to level up your gear and your guys again, and then you can start going fighting hard patrols. And this is all in the first area. So yeah, it's got to point out there's other ways that they do this too. Like, they just be like, oh, we're just going to give you however many soldiers you have plus one or whatever your or like Stellaris. I haven't played it for ages, but there's a thing where you go attacking someone with your navy or whatever, and then suddenly they've just gone, oh, we just gave them free stuff, and now they're equal to you. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of that.
Right.
People love that
I,
stuff.
Another, I think, classic that did this was the original Homeworld. So Homeworld, you know, the campaign, you went from like map to map, and you would mine resources, build ships. There's a fixed amount of resources you could mine on each map, but you could also steal enemy ships. And if you could steal enemy ships, it was like a way to get more resources than you were supposed to from that map. And especially because of the ship stealing mechanic, but you could also lose ships. If you lost ships in a fight, they'd be gone permanently, right? So you basically had the ability, like if we think about Homeworld, like each map you had the potential to gain like a certain amount of power, and you also had the ability to lose power if you like lost a major army. But if you're designing each of these encounters and you hard code what enemies are going to be there, then do you design the maps for maximum resource extraction and never losing any units? Because over the course of like 10 campaigns, if you lose units, that's going to be a big difference in your army power.
Well, that's a
And
risk reward sort of thing, isn't it? And I know even in Homeworld 3, they have a roguelite mode where you can, after you finish your objective, you can stick around and harvest more resources, but the game it'll just wipe you off the map if you stick around for about a minute longer than the end of the game. And you have to be pretty quick about finishing the mission too. But yeah, if you muck around, they'll just wipe you off the map. So but when it's not working like that, it's very much like a risk reward thing, isn't it?
yeah, it can be. In the original Homeworld, though, what they do is, because this was like a hard problem for them to solve, what they decided is, okay, if you have, 20,000 credits worth of ships, then you're going to fight 20,000 credits worth of ships. So we're just going to scale up the opposing fleet by however much you have. So it's like there's no point really to saving ships or to like accruing more resources. So these level scaling things, I think in general, are like hated. But it's like if you don't have it, there's a very hard problem to solve.
I feel like this is what I would call a band-aid fix, though. This is when you're having to resort to that kind of thing. This shows a weakness in your initial game design. You like I said, I know Emperor of the Fading Suns isn't perfect, by the way, but that shows you an example of a game where they've really, really thought about this stuff, and they've put stuff in there that is natural counterbalances to these things. You don't try to fix it after the fact, because when you do that, it feels bad. I mean, just think about how bad does it feel? Yeah, if you've played really, really well in a game and you've done really well, you want to be able to, for a little while at least, experience the power of, wow, I've saved all these ships. I've got all these powerful ships that I've saved. But if the game kind of punishes you for it, I mean, obviously it's trying to keep the challenge consistent, but there's a level of player expectation that's stymied when you do that, because it's just like, all right, well, now it doesn't seem to matter how many ships, how well I do in the game. I'm always just going to have this kind of like flat curve. The other thing is that I think that flat curves boring. Like, sorry, that's not a flat curve. You get the idea though. Like flat curves are kind of boring. You kind of want your game to go a bit like this, and to have this shark fin kind of thing when it comes to sort of difficulty. You want That's how you want it to look, right? Because you basically want it so that it just gets really difficult and you got to get over this hump, but then it's like, oh, I get it to enjoy the power, great. And then you have a bit of a chill, right? And then the difficulty starts ramping up, and then it gets kind of almost like a cliff, and you're like, and you get over it again, right? That is the compelling game design curve like that. You want it to be like shark fins, in going up. You don't want like that. That's boring. You don't want that, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point.
Player expectation of a power curve is a topic that we need to think about too. What is the player expecting in terms of the fun that they're going to be getting, in terms of other games that they've played in the genre. That all player expectation versus what they're actually experiencing in the game. It's so important. It's really, really important.
I think so. On this topic of like risk reward, I think an interesting one is like if you think of Slay the Spire, you can choose like in a roguelike, you basically have like these different paths you can take, and some paths are harder and some are easier. If you take the hard one, you're a lot more likely to die, but you get a lot better rewards, so you're maybe more likely to win later.
Yeah.
But you can't win later if you die now. So if you have, imagine like you're going to attack another province or something, but let's say every unit you bring to attack is going to cost you more money or something like that. Like to mobilize your army, it costs money. If you would want to take that province with the least amount of army you could to maximize the amount of money, or to maximize your resources, right? So if you have a system where there's some incentive to like leave stuff behind, in Dominions this exists in a major way, because there's a huge incentive to leave all your mages at home and have them research or forge or do whatever.
Yep.
But if you want a huge power spike, you bring your mages with you.
Yeah.
And that provides this huge rubber band mechanic where like, oh no, this guy is like, let's say for this one, this guy is way stronger than me, right? And I'm the red guy, but I figure out like, hey, I'm going to mobilize all my mages right here, and I'm going to choose to fight him, but I'm going to bring all these resources, and he's being greedy and keeping his at home. And by doing that, I can chunk him down.
Yeah.
That's
an interesting choice. Risk reward.
Right. So I think this is, I think, a very powerful scaling snowball mechanic. If you have a reason for players to be greedy and to leave stuff behind, like to bring as little as possible, then it makes the game challenging longer, because they're sitting there like investing in the future, which is going to make the current time more challenging. And then at the end of the game, when it's like kind of a crescendo of power, they get to go out in a huge bang, right? They mobilize all the stuff they built up, and then you have the big fights, and then it's over.
Yeah. Kind of what you want is, the bigger your snowball gets, the thinner the sheet of ice it's got to roll over. Yeah. So
yeah,
what I mean is that as you get more powerful in a certain way, it also should put you at risk in some way too. So, for example, as you said, if you've got a very powerful player that you can, you're behind them. You haven't played as well as them in some way, but by putting in this extra risk, you've got the capability of, like you say, chopping off a part of their power curve. But that's risky, because if you lose your mages, you're kind of out of the game, aren't you? It's the same. Dominions has got another mechanic that's really, really interesting like this, which is the gem system for combat. So you have to spend gems for the best spells, and you can also invest more gems into your basic spells to improve the performance. So, for example, a mage with gems can basically cast more an effective magic than a mage who doesn't have gems. But gems are a valuable resource in Dominions because they're not just used in combat. Very, very clever games design, because you can use gems to increase your economy. There's all sorts of use for gems, right? There's ways of attacking your enemy's economy with them. They can be used for unit production. They can be used for trade with other players as a diplomacy, as a resource in diplomacy. There's all sorts of stuff you can do with them. So if you want to throw them into a battle to increase your odds of winning that battle in an efficient way, or to tip the odds in your favor to win a critical battle that's on a knife edge, then you can do. And then there's this the kind of like interesting counterplay where players have figured out how to bait people into using all their gems in a big battle. You know, or you have the whole gem baiting stuff where this is kind of a Dominion specific thing, but like you'll send your force, a small force in first. The enemy's expecting a larger force. They script all their mages to use all these expensive spells, and they blow all their gems. They obliterate your army, or it runs away, whatever. And then their force that was here in power level because they had gems compared to their enemy, that was here. Now they're down here because they ain't got no gems. Risk reward, very very clever mechanic, I think.
Yeah, I think, by the way, I think if you let modern developers go after Dominions and like fix it, it's not hard to imagine they would abstract research. They're like, why do you have all these mages that you're having to assign each one individually to research spells? And let's get rid of that, and let's just say you can build buildings, and the buildings generate research. Like, why not do that? That's how every other game does it.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, what do you lose when you do that? You no longer have this mechanic where you have these super valuable combat mages that are going to be really useful for like running around with your army. You no longer have a reason to leave them at home.
Yeah.
You're like, great, we can just use them all. Well, then there's no like reserve for you to call upon as like a rubber band mechanic to like upset fights against like a more powerful player. Yep. So there's this really interesting thing where having these powerful things that you're really heavily incentivized to like leave at home makes it where even when a big player attacks a smaller player, like where you have more troops, a better army, whatever, it's not guaranteed you win because you have to fight through their mage core.
By the way, just quickly on Dominions, this is something I wanted to mention really quickly. One of the reasons why I resist a lot of, as a Dominions player, as I resist a lot of the calls for players to simplify the game, whether that's to make the UI easier to understand or whatever. One of the big things that it often comes up is blood hunting. Let's just automate blood hunting because blood hunting is laborious.
Yeah.
The problem is like blood magic in Dominions is incredibly powerful. It's really strong. It's like you have to put investment into it to get it working. And one of the balancing factors of blood magic is that you have to manually collect your blood slaves, and there's a meta game around it, and it is a little bit laborious, although there's plenty of hotkeys that people seem to forget about, which I find makes it reasonably easy to do. But removing the manual blood hunting stops players being able to attack you in the economy. Okay, you can't just attack provinces where your blood hunters are. Take them out of the game. They're mages as well, so they can't research. That's another thing. Your mages have to blood hunt. Like anyone who plays EA Lanka will understand how limited your limited mages are. You want them summoning undead. You also want raising undead. You want them fucking blood hunting, and you also need them to fight, and you also need them to research. These are interesting choices, and when you start dumbing the game down by removing certain mechanics or automating things to make it easier, actually you're reducing the level of interaction with the game, and it throws out a whole other load of the balance as well. Illwinter aren't stupid. They've thought about these things really carefully over like 20 years. So yeah, I just wanted to get that was a little point I wanted to make, because it's one thing I've always found myself arguing against people like, no, don't dumb down Dominions. It's good as it is. It's got problems, but it's they've thought about it more than you think.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Let me pull up my notes, see what other game we're going to
Did we
talk
cover
about.
the MOBA comeback mechanics yet? Like, because we were talking about League of Legends and stuff earlier.
Yeah.
Comeback mechanics are really important to talk about. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Do we want to do Dota or League of Legends first?
I don't know too much about
either
League.
of these games. Yeah,
So,
I don't know anything about them.
Yeah, I don't know that much about Dota either. So.
Okay.
Well, I know. Okay, so I'll start. So I know, like with MOBAs like League of Legends, which I haven't played for a while, but I remember them pretty well. If the other team is getting, if they're doing really well, they've got a lot of kills or whatever, and they're getting quite a way ahead, there's certain ways you can flip that around. Like they have a spawn called the Baron that pops up in the middle of the river after a certain point in the game. I can't remember how far it is. I think it's like 15 minutes in or something. And there'll be this, I think they have, is it Roshan in Dota as well? Same sort of thing. So they have, this Baron pops up, and if the team is behind, they can go and kill this Baron, and then they get a really powerful buff, and that can help them, make a comeback, like, take out some towers or whatever to recover. But then you want to be really careful about when you're doing it, which kind of leans into risk reward as well, because you sort of need to wait, like try and get a moment where the enemy doesn't know you're going to do it, because they can drop wards and they have ways of scouting around the Baron to see if you're going to do it. And there's a lot of counterplay as well. So it's not just, a free comeback mechanic. You have to actually work for it. So you can go over and you can kill this Baron, and then the other team, if they know that you're doing it or they catch you doing it, they can either try and wipe out your team or they can try and snipe the Baron kill, so then they get the buff. So it's very risky to do, but if you can pull it off, you get a major buff, and then that can help you level the playing field.
Yeah, I think a good one to I'll mention on Dota too. So like a big thing with Dota is that the amount of money you get for hero kills also scales based on how far behind you are. So if you're way far behind and you kill an enemy hero, you get a lot. Especially if there's like a kill streak mechanic. If they have like a 5 times kill streak, you get more money when you finally kill them too. So there's several mechanics. There was one patch where they had been, I think, upping the comeback mechanics, and they just had been like tweaking this knob, turning it up a little bit more, and then they turned it up even more. And they had turned it up so much that it was in your interest to get behind and then to try to jump on like the diving board of the comeback mechanics so hard that you would just be like this is what you would want to do in the game. You would want to be like behind, start getting behind. And before you got so far behind, you would never win. You just like try to swing and win a huge team fight. And the comeback mechanics were so hard, it would catapult you like so far above the enemy team that they wouldn't be able to catch you.
Yeah, it's a bit overtuned.
It's a bit overtuned, but they pulled it out. But they did keep it in, and it helped the game stay in like a more challenging kind of fun zone for longer. But it wasn't free. It wasn't like you get this for free. It was like the rewards would shift based on how far ahead or how far behind you were.
I'm a bit concerned that comeback mechanics are part of what I call band-aid games design, to be honest. I think if you're needing comeback mechanics, there's probably something wrong with your game. But there's a big example in Tekken. So the Tekken 8 is really kind of like Tekken 7 was kind of bad for it, and Tekken 8 is really bad now. And what it is that there's a problem in Tekken, I think, where new players come into the game, they get absolutely crushed by veteran players who've been playing, with legacy skill, who've been playing for like 20 years like me. I'm not saying I'm great, by the way, but I'm just saying, players like me who've been playing since Tekken 1 or 2. And so they were not finding it very fun. They jump into the ladder, they play a bit, they get absolutely wrecked, and they turn the game off and they don't play again. That's a bad thing, right? So what they started doing is they started making it so that they put these mechanics in. So, in Tekken, it's basically beat each other until the hit point bar goes to a certain point, and then you lose. Now, with the heat, with the rage arts, it's called, when health goes below something like 20% or 15%, you get this ability to unleash a very powerful move, and you time it right, and it does this big, annoying, long cinematic you got to sit through and watch, and it looks cool and flashy, but it's actually it takes you out of the game, and then it just wipes out a massive amount of hit points off the enemy, and then so now you're kind of back in the game, right? Because you've got the ability to be able to think, I hate these things. I think that in skill-based games, it's a cancer on skill-based game design, because what you really need to do is fix the game at the core level. Why is it that players are hitting this brick wall where the new players are coming in, they're coming up against other new players who've played a little bit longer than them, and they've learned like these 10-hit combos, which are like they've made it so that you can just repeatedly hit somebody without them having a chance to turn things around, right? So in a more reasonable game like Virtua Fighter, you might be able to get like 4 or 5 hits off in a combo string, and it takes off a decent amount of hit points, but then they have the opportunity to be able to get back up to start fighting back. But in Tekken, because players feel powerful, if they can do like 10, 15 hits, it doesn't allow newer players, particularly, the opportunity to be able to come back. So band-aid mechanics come in. Oh, well, we need to fix that. Rather than reducing the the lethality of some of the attacks, or making it so that the attack strings don't all chain up for like 15 hits or whatever, No, they don't want to do that because they feel that it will kill the fantasy, the power fantasy. So instead, they band-aid it by adding these arbitrary mechanics like, rage arts, where you can just what you were saying here, Lucid, about how you've got this power curve where people are actually incentivized to not play correctly, and then they get this artificial boost. That's really bad in Tekken, because what's happened now, it's completely changed the game, where you see, instead of players kind of going in, being aggressive, trying to find hitting, throwing out hits, trying to fish for openings, that kind of stuff, all the good stuff from fighting games. Instead, as soon as players get to the point where they know that they're about to trigger this particular thing, the game just slows to a crawl as they just start. But in Tekken 7, it was terrible. They'd just be backing off. And it's like, no, get in there and fight. It's made it the most boring game to watch. It was so frustrating. So now they've added more band-aid mechanics to make it so that players are forced to get into combat range, because they didn't want people backing off, because that was boring. But so instead of taking out the rage arts and fixing the initial problem, they add more crap, like this new heat system where you just get this, it's like this meter goes up, and they're just adding more and more garbage, piling it onto the sculpture, like slapping more clay onto the model, when it really needs to be trimmed down. Do you know what I mean? So I think I feel like comeback mechanics are kind of bad games design, and I say that carefully. I
want to expand. Okay, well, go ahead, Sean. But
I was going to say, I think it depends on how they're done, because like in the Baron example I was referring to, in the Tekken example you're referring to, it's basically a free I win button, basically, which that's bad. Like that's but in referring back to the example I was talking about in like your MOBAs, where you've got your Baron or your Roshan, it's not an I win button. It's a very risky play. Like if you go there and the enemy knows that you're there because they're already stronger than you, you're screwed. Like you're dead. They get the buff and then they just stomp you. Like I think when they're done like that, where there's an actual risk and where it can actually be countered by the opponent, then it's fine. But it needs to be still balanced in a way so that it's like I just said, so it's not an I win button.
Yeah, I think. Like, what if they were going to strategy games here? So I think you're right. Like, comeback mechanics can be bad, and you certainly don't want to incentive. Anytime you have a mechanic that's strong enough where you incentivize people to like do badly, you've gone too far, right? And that existed in Dota, and it sounds like it exists in Tekken. But if you look at like Dominions, what if there was a mechanic so that when you lose a big army, you get a bunch of money back? Right, that would be like a rebound mechanic, right? So that you lose an army, you get some money back. Like, it seems like, oh, that might be annoying. That isn't Dominions. It's called upkeep. Like you lose a big army, you lose a bunch of upkeep. You're like, oh man, I got a lot more money to spend every turn. And it makes sense. Like, you pay units troops, they're dead. You don't pay them anymore. Like
works as intended.
It works as intended, but that really, if you think about upkeep, it's a comeback mechanic. It's a way so that if you just power up and spend tons of money on military, especially if those units are just sitting around, you're paying this huge bill. But if you get that army wiped, you have a lot more disposable income to start building an army back up. So I think I think these things can be done well to help keep the game like in the fun zone a bit longer. But
I think in that case, the comeback mechanic is built is tied more closely to the core games design. And I know I say this a lot, and it sounds a bit vague, but I think just think of it in terms of is this comeback mechanic bolted on to fix a problem at a later date? Generally speaking, if it's like that, then it's probably going to be bad. Whereas if it's an integral part of the game and there's a lore-based reason for that, like you say, you don't have to pay your people anymore, right? So it makes sense. It's logical. I think that's absolutely fine. You're right. I think that then it's not. I think comeback mechanics got to be baked into the game's design early, and to not feel arbitrary.
Let's think of more of them. I know in Civilization, espionage is a kind of comeback mechanic, right? You're behind in technology, but using your spies, you can potentially get really valuable tech that other people have. But if you're ahead in technology, if you're winning the technology war, then that option isn't really open to you. I'm trying to think. Can y'all think of any other comeback mechanics in strategy games?
There's a related thing in Emperor of the Fading Suns where, because technology is in the lore is very, very, it's the church really frowns upon it. What happens is that the church as an entity, as an NPC entity, the players can influence this as well, but they will occasionally go, all right, we are now prescribing the following tech, and it might be something at the start, like for example, the plague bomb, which causes plague, as it might expect. That's a prescribed tech. So anybody who researches that, the church will come along with their inquisitors, and if they discover that technology in your labs, they'll burn your labs. Yeah, they'll declare war on you, burn your labs, and you're in big trouble. So every now and again, the church will be like, right, infantry units are now a prescribed tech. We don't want those. And they are heretical, and it creates this really interesting thing. Whereas if you're going for if you're trying to pile on the research, you've got more chance of pissing them off. So this is another kind of, it's not a comeback mechanic, but I'd call it a snowballing or scaling limiting factor that is built into the lore, and that works in a kind of sort of randomized way, but the players can influence it. Like they can trade, like they can give the goal like loads of money to the church, and the church will go, okay, all right, I'll prescribe that tech that your enemies are using against you. Do you know what I mean? It's really cool. And so I think that I love stuff like that, where it's not necessarily a comeback mechanic necessarily, but like in a more broader umbrella of limiting factors that are fun to engage with. I think that's cool, because limitation drives creativity to some extent in games, right?
Yeah, certainly.
I'm trying to think of one. I was sort of thinking of like that Titan mechanic with Zephon in the end game, but I don't think it's really a comeback mechanic.
It's kind of a limiting. It's what I would put under that. So the end game stuff with Zephon, I think I personally think that they put that in there to make the diplomacy make sense in a game where diplomacy just completely breaks the game and ruins it. So I think that that's like a balance. It's like a balancing factor, or almost like an excuse to put the diplomacy in, because without the diplomacy in Zephon, you can have like a 10 turn period where nobody's fighting, and it's the most boring game ever because there's no depth to the economic simulation at all. So it's just
it kind of ruins the pacing. Like if it's sort of a larger discussion, but you kind of need that end game to keep the pacing. And I don't know. Yeah, it's not really a comeback mechanic, because like if you spawn your Titans, but if you're not doing well, you're still going to get stomped anyway. So that doesn't really count.
I think it's interesting because this is part of a greater topic in the topic of scaling. We do need to talk about how fun is the game at each level of the scale, right? Mm-hmm. I've got a real problem with games that are boring at the start, and they make you play for hours before you get to use the cool stuff.
Well, don't worry, the game's fun. Just spend 6 more hours and you'll get to the fun part.
Yeah, it's good, bro. I played 20 hours, but trust me, Blair.
And I get I've got more appreciation for Age of Wonders 4's games design the more I've looked at it, actually. But that is still the main issue that I've got with it. That I find that the early game stuff isn't that fun. And Defenders, if you go on any of my videos where I've talked about Age of Wonders, you will always get multiple comments from people who go, you're not playing it for long enough. You need to play it until the end, and then the fun bit. And it's like, no, the fun bit isn't. I'm not going to wait until 4 hours or 8 hours of gameplay. I need the game to be fun from the start. Dominions is great. Conquest of Elysium is great. The reason is because they immediately give you access to cool tools. And even though you might have a small amount of armies at the start of a Dominions game, the amount of range of options that you have with which to approach your game is huge. There's a huge decision space. Okay, it's fun.
Yeah.
But when you're just playing the start of the game with basic spearmen. Master of Magic's kind of bad for this, although I think Master of Magic at least allowed you a bit more access to cool stuff with regards to your summons and stuff, right? Whereas Age of Wonders, I mean, you really got to play for a while to get any of the kind of really interesting stuff that isn't just a function of number one games design or numbers go up, And so I think that games have got to be fun at all levels of the scale.
Let's talk one more topic on the scaling thing, and then let's go to that, because I feel like that's chapter 2 of this, which is
sure.
Like scaling and fun, because that's a whole different thing in a way. One thing I want to mention before we kind of close this part out is this idea of like bumpers or towers. And like if you think of it, why towers originally in like a strategy game are like a form of base defense, which are supposed to be, there's always like tower rush things, but they're supposed to be a tool which can only be used defensively, and that allows the game to like bloom more. It's a way where you can like still defend yourself while, you know, investing in the future.
Yeah.
Whereas if somebody goes all in on some rush and there's not like towers or anything, you're just kind of screwed. So if you look at that in a game like Dota, towers basically function, you know, there's each side of the map and the guys stream, and then you have towers here. Basically what they do, if you look at the map as a form of like resources, right? Like if you have half the map, you can get half the gold, you know, half the map's worth of gold of the bounty runes that spawn, of the neutral creeps that spawn. There's like a huge amount of jungle value just in controlling the map. By the time you have somebody pinned into the base, you then have like 80% of the map. So you're able to farm like a lot more of the potential value. But if you're doing that, if your heroes are all spread out over the map, there's also that like risk reward thing, because now you're spread out, you're farming. It's maybe easier for the enemy team to like 3v1 one of your guys and pick them off.
Yeah.
But the towers are an important thing, because until you destroy the towers, it's really hard to project control over the whole portion of the map.
Yep.
And you know, because the towers are giving vision and protection and these sorts of things. But so basically what happens is while the game is going like this, and it's like you would be on some curve to like spiral out of control, where like you would, you know, if there weren't towers, you would gain control of the map maybe really early. But you hit this point and it's like, oh no, there's towers here. And then you have to like sort of adjust until you can break a tower. And then once you break the tower, you get like a nice little like spike back up, because you're getting more control of the map. You can start farming gold faster. Probably wouldn't be quite this steep, and then you keep going. And you can't like push and win early because you're outmatched by the towers, right? Like the game
It's like
has
the forts. It's like the forts in Dominions. Sorry to interrupt,
Right.
but yeah, it just got me thinking. Like in Dominions, you got the forts, and they work in a similar way, aren't they? They're like bumpers, basically.
Right.
And they're also
Yeah.
resource generators, but in a defensive, you know, in the terms of like in the terms of power scale slowing, that's one of the functions that they have.
Sure. Like imagine Dominions without any forts. You would just run at somebody's capital and you take it and it's over. Like
Yeah,
the game, you could eliminate somebody in like 7 turns. So
I think players have to understand this. Like, for example, in Sins of a Solar Empire 2, there's a bit of a problem at the moment with the community saying that static defenses in Sins aren't strong enough. So there's this player expectation that a starbase and a bunch of towers that are built around your planets, they should be strong enough to defeat big enemy fleets. And really, that's not the point of them at all. They're there as a bumper so that enemies can't just sneak in, you know, siege ships to kind of like destroy your infrastructure, you know, like small raiding parties or whatever. But if you actually have your own fleet guarding, a lot of these towers, they also have abilities that buff your fleets, right? So you've only got a limited amount of fleets that you can have in the game, or like a limited amount of ships. And if you have, you know, all of the things being equal, if you're defending a bunch of towers in Sins of a Solar Empire 2, you're going to win the battle compared to the guy who's not got the towers. So they're an interesting bumper, but they also provide a focal point that you want to lure players into, like so that you've got a defensive advantage in, you know, to even out the odds of a battle, basically. So it's often a bit of I find out, you know, I watch people and they go, the star bases aren't strong enough, and it's like, you know, you don't understand, this is not a tower defense game. They're not supposed to be able to hold off massive fleets of enemies. A determined enemy needs to be able to overcome a bumper. Like, because if it can't, it's no longer a bumper. It's become a main scaling, you know, it's a scaling mechanic again, and they're not supposed to work like that.
And if you could just build a tower that could defeat an entire enemy fleet, it would have to be absurdly expensive to offset the safety that it gives you. Because otherwise it just has to be supported. Otherwise, well, you need if they're just built as bumpers, they need support to be able to defend, like you were saying.
Yeah. Even like you can stack some of these star bases. You know, there's one faction that's designed around defense, and they can build 2 star bases. And you can if you really push your economy into them and level them up and add loads of all these abilities that they can have, like these star base items that you can build for them. Yes, they can be incredibly tough to crack. But only really one of the factions gets that ability. So because that leans into their thing. So I think it's the idea of towers and bumpers, they need to be right. They need to be, you know, they do need to be speed bumps and not, and not just another playing piece, if you see what I mean. Because I think if they just become another playing piece, they're not fulfilling the role of slowing scaling. Actually, they just add to it, if you follow it. They add to the scaling.
Well, if we go back to the towers and the MOBAs, even if you do take out, okay, say you've got 3 lanes, you take out your mid tower, and then you've got your team starts pushing up the middle lane, that also carries its own risk if you haven't taken out all 3 towers, because you're overextending, you're pushing too far in the middle lane where you don't really have any support, and then there's more opportunity for your opponent to take you out in the jungle. So even doing that, and then as you get through your first layer of towers, I can't remember if it works the same in Dota, but in League of Legends, the second towers are stronger, and then the third towers, they'll have some sort of shield or something like that, and then you get into the main base, and then you've got like the base has its own basically super weapon laser thing. So like the further you get in, the harder it gets to crack, but then it sort of gates your characters because they have to get to a certain level and have better gear before they can effectively take the next tower.
Yeah, I think these mechanics are usually fun since they keep the game from spiraling out of control too quickly. They give, more time for the game to develop, but they can definitely be overdone too, And then like in StarCraft, you have tower rushes and stuff, so it's like you also want to be sort of careful not to overdo it, because these bumper mechanics are defensive bonuses if you think about it. They're things that can really only be used on the defensive. If they're done too much, they can slow the game down to like a crawl where there's no incentive to attack. Like everybody's trying to defend.
And
sorry.
Oh,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like even with the towers that are there, they're only really effective until a certain point too. So you can't just turtle behind a tower for the entire game. Like for the first tier of towers, by about level, I can't even remember, like say level 5. Basically, no, I think you usually go to like 5 or 6 and then go to the base, then come back. So about, say, I don't know, level 7 or 8, one side should expect to have at least one tower down. Like you get to a certain point where you can just destroy a tower in about 5 seconds. So it doesn't hold the game up forever.
It's interesting as well because Sean showed a way that even though towers are a defensive thing, they actually project power in an offensive way. If they're, so for example, he gave the example of if the middle lane is clear, but they've still got the towers defending on either flank, then that projects a potential attack power into the enemy's flanks. So I guess it is a defensive thing, but that still projects offensive power, so to speak. So it's not just a bumper; it can be used as a scaling mechanic too.
Yeah, and if you, like in Dominions, province defense is another bumper, right? So we talked about forts, but province defense is basically just this button you click and you spend usually a ton of money if you want to do it high. But you can have a lot of province defense show up, and that'll add to your defensive forces when you're defending. So it's potentially a very expensive, but also a very powerful tool for defending a province. And those are things that make it where it's hard. It gives you a lot more tools as a defender, which keep the game, I think, in the fun zone a bit. It makes it easier to have a reversal, because generally, like the way a lot of these games work is the bigger you get, the stronger you are, the more armies you have. There's like a lot of this snowball momentum. But what's anti-snowball? Anti-snowball is like having options to like do cool stuff in the defense. Yeah. So I think it's good to have things that give players the ability to defend stuff, but you just want to make sure. So like an example of this in a bad way is like in the late game in Dominions, you have these really powerful spells that can wipe out enemies, but you can protect enemies from those spells if you're hiding in your own fort. But if you move outside of your fort, which you have to do if you're going to attack, then you can be hit by these. So then like a lot of the really late game stuff becomes about like nuking enemies from orbit with these powerful spells. And like that's sort of not fun, because then you get this like campy defensive gameplay style. So I think on one hand it's really good to have defensive tools. On the other hand, if those tools are too strong, then like it kind of isn't fun.
All right, guys, I'm going to be back in about 30 seconds. Excuse me.
All right. Guess we'll just wait here.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, with certain RTS games too. I was thinking of I haven't played Dune 2, but I played Dune 2000. With all those Command and Conquer ones, you get your super weapons like your orbital lasers and your death hand missiles and all the rest of it. Like at the end of the game, you have to be able to take that stuff into account. You have to go, right, okay, this guy, if I launch this mass attack, this guy's going to probably fire an orbital laser and wipe out half my army. So you have to be able to work around that. Maybe have something more mobile, or at least be prepared for it, or have some kind of counter, which I don't think you could really do anyway. But I remember June 2000 in particular. If you got the Harkonnens, they launched a Death Hand missile, and there's nothing you can really do. You just wait there while one of your buildings gets destroyed.
Yeah.
But then the thing with those too is that you have to know where the targets are to be able to deploy them effectively. So there's sort of that limiter as well, I guess. If they haven't really penetrated that far into your base, or if you've made them back off, it makes, because then the fog of war comes up and then they don't know where to target it. So there's some kind of ways to counter it, but I don't know if it was balanced super well.
Yeah, I tend to not. I mean, it's kind of interesting. It's interesting you mentioned the super weapons of like Command and Conquer with nukes and stuff. I'd never really thought about the minions as that, like the flames from the sky is a nuke, but it really is. It's the same sort of kind of mechanic. I've never liked the nukes in those games, like the ion beam or the Kim bomb or whatever. Like, I don't know, for some reason those just never resonated much with me. Like, I never really liked winning that way, and I never liked the AI using them against me.
I feel like they're kind of going more for like bombastic effect than any kind of balance, which I don't really have a problem with, but like, because they look cool as hell. If you fire like an ion laser and it just like irradiates the big part of the battlefield, like it looks cool as, but it's also kind of annoying when you're getting hit by it, and even when you're using it, it feels kind of cheesy.
You know what I think it is? I think it's that they're not very interactive. I think it's like, oh, this thing happens and now you're fucked. There's no way to like defend against it. Whereas I think if you had like a mage or something in a battle that casts the nuke, but you had the ability, if you had the right stuff, to like snipe that mage before he nukes your army, to me that's a lot more interesting. Or if you had like an artillery piece, you had to get into range and that artillery piece is going to shoot a shell. Or if you had missile defenses you could put up that could shoot a nuke out of the sky. Those things are more interesting than like, oh, we've just decided to delete this. Like, I don't know. I never liked those mechanics.
Well, the Terrans in StarCraft, they have that because you have the nukes, but you need to get a ghost into position to fire the nuke. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's perfect. I like how they've implemented it there, because it's not like hey, well, there's a nuke in your bases. There's actually nothing like that in StarCraft, where it's like you get targeted by God basically and have certain things destroyed. Like there's always counterplay.
Do you remember in June 2, it was Death Hand approaching? And it would just be this missile just comes out of nowhere, and your base is gone.
It was like that really like 2D cardboardy looking missile, and it goes into your building and it just like disintegrates like Thanos snap. That was cool.
It was cool. I mean, that's a great way to make the player feel powerful, but that was a single player game for a reason, I think.
Yeah, that's what we're just saying. Like there's ones like that where it's just it's sort of almost more for thematic effect than it is for any sort of like gameplay reason. But then in certain other games like StarCraft, you've got where you've got a unit like a ghost is required to deploy a nuke because they need to target the nuke, like and stuff like that. At least as a counterplay, so it's more multiplayer oriented.
Yeah, this is a quick thought before we move on, but just consider in any game where your sort of ability to deplete enemy forces is often on a sort of linear level, so your soldiers are fighting, they kill troops one by one, whatever. Just think about like Total War, for example, where you got a unit of like two blocks of troops attacking each other and they're whittling each other down, depending on how much damage they're doing. Scaling stuff can also be things like area of effect attacks. So you imagine a fireball that just comes and just goes that, or like an artillery, like so artillery in a military game, which has a wide area of effect, which is basically a shortcut to eliminating enemy forces, so that it's like a power multiplier in some ways. Now, obviously, in real life, that's not how artillery is generally used. It's more of an area denial thing with multiple effects, but still, you get the idea. Area of effect attacks, anything that is some way of some ability for you to gain a rapid advantage. Usually at the expense of having to spend some kind of resource. That's kind of a scaling mechanic too, I guess.
Yeah, in a way. It's like how do you deal with large armies? But one thing I want to mention too, I said bumpers are going to be the last one, but then one more occurred to me. The way enemies get generated in Factorio is based off pollution. Like the more buildings you have, the more pollution you generate, the more pollution you produce. The more like pollution, when it makes its way to an enemy camp, it spawns enemies to attack you. So basically, by scaling up, you are going to cause more enemy attacks.
Yeah.
And I find that fun, because if you're a slow player and you build up quickly, because this is the thing in Factorio, somebody who's really good, like who's like a speed runner person, is going to be doing this.
Yeah.
Right. The average player is going to do this.
Yeah, that's me.
You know? Yeah. And the thing is how do you set an AI up to do for either of them? Well, pollution is going to, this guy's going to be generating a fuck ton of pollution pretty quickly. Yeah. You're not. You know, you're going to be eco-friendly just by design. And I think the interesting thing about a pollution mechanic is that it's like a core game system and you can interact with it. Like you can see the pollution, buildings generate it. There's also the option to go like low pollution options. Like you can do solar panels and not make much. You can put efficiency modules in your buildings and not make much pollution. So you can do this like slow thing where you're not generating a ton of pollution. That's kind of fun. You have fewer enemies, but the fast thing generates a lot.
It's a great mechanic. Pollution, it's been used a lot, like that specific thing. I know we're talking about a more generalized thing, but specifically the idea of pollution has been used loads. It's used in Civilization. It's quite a big thing in the more recent Galciv games, because pollution's really cool in that. Like, the more pollution you've got from industry, it's the less growth you get, natural growth of your citizens. But because your citizens are also an alternative way of creating industry, they're like if you think of them being like a cottage industry almost, as opposed to factories, you can kind of avoid pollution by instead of focusing on growth. So you've got this really cool thing where you might be playing a faction that really struggle with pollution because pollution causes big problems. Then what you can do is you can have these growth planets where you hothouse population growth, and then then you will have just a few planets where they're really heavily polluted, where no one can grow. They won't grow any population. But then you use these growth planets to send your citizens over to these, to these other planets to help out with the factories. So it's a really cool mechanic, because it just kind of it encourages you to think in different ways, and because citizen growth scaling works pretty differently to the way that the more factory based growth scaling works. It gives the player a really cool crunchy puzzle to figure out. If you're that kind of min-max kind of gamer, it's like, is this going to get me more economy, or is this going to be better? What's the trade-offs on each? And I really like that kind of gameplay.
Well, that was like Anno 2070 had that. It's not. I don't know how it worked in a competitive thing, because I really just played the campaign of that. But they had two different factions. They had the eco faction, where you want to reduce pollution as little as possible, and there's actually a mission in the campaign where it's like a whole bunch of nukes got fired by a rogue AI or something and went off, and you've got to like basically fix the environment so that your faction can function on the territory that you've entered. And then you've got the other ones, the tycoons, where they just don't care about pollution at all, and they just do like coal and nuclear power and all that kind of thing, and it doesn't matter. So I can't remember if there's some kind of way that they interact with each other. I imagine there would be, but yeah. So you've got very different factions, and one of them relies on having no pollution, and the other one relies on having just as much as they want. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think the interesting, like the obvious comparison here, I think between pollution and level scaling, and how I think one of the reasons how it's different is there's usually ways to like mitigate pollution, like in Factorio. I was explaining there's ways to mitigate it. But if you look at just like level scaling, then there's level scaling like in Homeworld or something, there's never a way to mitigate it. It's like however big of a fleet you bring, the enemy's going to bring that big of a fleet. But if you thought about like if you applied the pollution mechanic to Homeworld, the original, then it's like maybe the threat of your fleet or something, like, because it wouldn't be called pollution, but your fleet generates a certain amount of threat, but maybe there's some way to mitigate that threat, like by upgrading ships or something like that, and that will decrease the amount. Basically, it manages the level scaling. So it's like you could choose to get really strong really fast, but then you're going to have a lot of threat. And I don't think there's like a simple way to do this. I think these are like difficult, challenging problems as a game designer. But
did you guys play AI War?
I think how they did it in Factorio worked. Yeah, go ahead.
That's how AI War works. So it's a asymmetric 4X like game where you start out with nothing. Start out with a single home world, and this you've got to take over. Your opponent is this AI faction, and it's the law of it is that you've been locked down on Earth or your own planet, but you've got to defeat the this tyrannical AI led regime. But they're dealing with some other problem off in some other galaxy, right? So it's only got a small amount of attention to be able to deal with you. So it's got this massive empire, and you've got to take territory. But the more territory you take, if you don't do it in a smart way, it raises the threat level. And the more the threat level raises, the more resources the AI starts dedicating towards dealing with you. Sorcerer King also works like this as well, to a lesser extent, but it's a very similar game in that the quicker you expand, the faster you try to snowball, the more you get slapped down by the AI. And so it's very much like the pollution mechanic in Factorio as well. So I like this kind of game design. I think single player games, that's great. It's really interesting. And AI, I mean, Sorcerer King is, I quite like that game, but it wasn't great. It wasn't perfect. But at least what they tried to do, what Stardock tried to do, that was really fascinating. AI War is a much better implementation of that kind of thing, where the whole game's built around this threat mechanic, and you got to take out this place first because that will reduce your threat just a little bit. But you want this one because this will give you a new ship type, but that will raise your threat level higher. So what's the choice that you make? And then So it's a cool. I think that's a really interesting point you brought out with with that Factorio pollution thing, because there are a few other games that use similar kind of mechanics in order to deal with scaling.
Yeah. All right, are you ready to transition? We can talk about scaling and fun.
Yeah.
So I think the main thing, and this is sort of what, oh gosh, we're reconnecting. I think this is sort of the thing we were talking about, which is that it's like there's, if there's like an axis of like, let's say this is player 1, and let's say this is player 2, and this is their power, that like this part would be like if they're equal power, like, okay, that's probably fun. And then you have zones off of it, like this is probably like the fun range, right? Like where you can kind of come back. And then, oh wait, I'm sorry, this was the previous discussion. I'm sorry, I'm drawing the wrong thing.
I was wondering, where's that? I'm trying to find it.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, oh no, scaling and fun. So this is more about like UI and stuff and game design. Like, is the game fun? So this is one of my problems with like Age of Wonders 4, or a lot of the Age of Wonders series. It's that like it's a tactical battle game, but for me, and we'd have to get Daz on here, and there's going to be people who watch this because we did that video on Age of Wonders 4. They're going to say I don't know anything about the game, and that's fine. But for me, as I got more armies and stuff to manage, it wasn't really more fun. Like I didn't enjoy it. Didn't scale well from like a playability perspective. So I think you like on one end you have Dota or like MOBAs, where as you scale a ton as a player, but you still really only control one unit. Your abilities and stuff get more complicated. So the micro for controlling that one unit, because you now have all these activated items and stuff you have to use your hotkeys for. So that gets harder. But you're still only making one unit, or controlling one unit. For strategy games, though, it's like how much... A good example of this, I think, is Factorio, right? Factorio, you end up... There's these like tiers of automation. So like as you get bigger, you start like at the end, you're doing blueprints and you have these packs of robots that go print everything out for you. At the beginning, you're mining wood yourself and mining rock yourself and forging things in your backpack. Then you get like, oh, well, we'll make a factory, like a single factory. And then it's like, oh, we have like chains of factories and they all like feed into each other, right? But we're having to build the factories. And by the end, it's like swarms of robots doing everything. So Factorio, like a lot of what they did was figure out how to make each of these tiers really crunchy and fun for all the different scales you play at. So like, if you were to think of the scaling in Age of Wonders, like at some point it should be an auto battler in a way. Like that's not really what the game is, but like the only way for it to be fun when you have like 100 units you're managing is if it auto battles,
or you put in an arbitrary limit to the amount of armies and cities that you can have, which is kind of what it does.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's a common problem that people talk about, which is not a problem for everybody. But if you talk in the 4X community and say, what is the big problem with 4X? They'll invariably say the late game is boring, it's a drag, there's too much stuff to manage. They'll use the term micromanagement. Doesn't mean that's not what micromanagement means, but they tend to use that term. But I think they mean it in a literal sense, like on the micro level, there's a lot of management. And I think that this issue, the whole idea of 4X games becoming boring in the late game is really a problem with boring 4X games. Because a decent game, a game that is designed to end at the right time, that scales properly, won't have you doing that. Like Master of Orion was perfect here. That way that the council vote comes up, and the people with the highest amount of votes, you get to vote between the two of them. It's genius, because as you like, if you're playing a conquest game, as you conquer more territory, you get more votes. So you start to slowly scale towards victory, right? And you can, if other players aren't playing cooperatively with you, you can either bomb their planets and just delete their votes essentially by killing population, or you can just take their planets and add them to yours. This is a natural scaling factor that stopped the game becoming boring, and it stopped you. You sometimes had to manage quite a lot of fleets, but because that game was relatively simple, it really wasn't a chore. The more complex your game is on the computer game level, by which I mean not the board game kind of like, the macro level of the design, but the more
Master
detailed.
Orion was auto battler though, right? Like you didn't micro the fleets in combat.
You can do. It was a tactical combat game, but you could it was automated if you wanted it to be. So it was like a bit like Age of Wonders.
Okay.
But so I mean, for the most part, once you're starting to get towards the end of the game, you tend to automate stuff because you've probably got better fleets. But the more detail that you put into the simulation side of things, the more like units that you have to move, or the more counters you push around, then I think some players get kind of fatigued with that towards the end. Now, wargamers don't seem to have this problem. You talk to wargamers, you talk to someone who plays like Gary Grigsby's War in the East or something, they just look at you funny if you say, "Oh, there's too many counters to push around." They're like, "Yep, that's why we're playing it. Like, that's what we want." But in 4X, something about the power, the sort of curve and the scaling of the game doesn't work quite the same way for certain people. So some people, and I say some because it really isn't an issue that everyone has, some people really don't like that massive amount of units that you have to manage. Like at the end of a game of Shadow Empire, if you've got a big map, there might be 100 units on the, like 100 different counters that you've got to push around every turn. Now, some people do not like that kind of gameplay at all, but I'm not a fan of, because what you're hinting at is that maybe by that point of the game sort of the player's attention then goes towards a macro level, and you're making more strategic decisions with broader strokes. I like the fantasy of controlling all them units. So I think if you're gonna design your game so that the player's choice is reduced at the end of the game, which is kind of how I see that, I think that you've got to do it in a way that's thematic and doesn't make it feel like you're taking something away from the player. So I think that
I want to suggest a paradigm. Okay. So if you look at the decision, one of the things we were talking about is you can make a game like we were coming down here where we were talking about snowballing. If you have a game that's on rails, where your decisions don't really matter, you're just choosing between different alternatives and maybe one's 2% better than the other. Yeah. This is not fun. This is not a fun strategy game. People don't like this. It's not fun. Yeah. So one of the things that makes a strategy game fun is it feels like the decisions you make, the actions you take, they matter. They're going to dramatically change how the game plays out. So one thing you can look at is how big of an effect do your choices have in terms of the effect on how hard you're scaling, your power curve, all that. It's easy to imagine at the beginning of the game, the choices, let's say you have like a fun game, the choices you make matter a lot. But then to do it, let's say when you're doing this, you're only making, let's say 6 major decisions a turn or 2 major decisions a turn. By the end of the game, maybe you're making 1,000 decisions a turn, potentially. The effect of each decision is just by nature of you're making 1,000 in a turn going to be way smaller.
Maybe.
right?
I'd argue that that's a problem with the quality of your game, though. I think that, for example, if you're playing, I'll use Shadow Empire as an example. It's like 4X game with very strong war game like combat, basically, one combat mechanics.
Hmm.
Now you might have 100 units on a front, or maybe 30 units on a front, which is a lot. Like that's way more than in most 4X games, right?
Yeah.
But if you put one of those out of place, or you attack with the wrong one at the wrong time, you're going to lose the war. So every single one of those those positions that you take, and the actions you take with each one of those units is critical. So I think if your game sucks, then maybe you're going to have like this low density of gameplay meaning. You know, the meaningful, low density of meaningful decisions. But if you've got you've got a high amount of decisions to make, but each one of them are critical, I think some players like that. And I'm not saying that everyone does,
Yeah.
I don't want to play to what's popular or what sells, because that's a different
I
conversation.
think you're bringing up an interesting point. Like if you think about dominions, in like an important late game battle, if you mess up one spell, that might cause you to lose a major army and then lose the game.
Yes.
So I think there is a thing where when you have a concert of actions, where let's say it's going to take 100 actions to script a Dominion's army.
Yeah.
But they're really tightly interlinked. Where if you fuck a few things up, the army's going to lose.
Yes.
Then there's still a big effect to each action, even though you're taking 100. I think that's okay. But if you're...
that's also a hard sell for a lot of people, by the way, that kind of gameplay.
Sure.
It's a hard sell for me, and I like complex games. So
right.
I think,
yeah.
And same with Shadow Empire, it's a hard sell to get a lot of people invested that much at the end of the game, where, when you've been playing for 50, 60 hours already, to then to turn that game on in a multiplayer game, for example, and make those critical decisions where you got to think about 20, 30, 40 units on a front and get it right, So, I'm just to counter my own point. I think it can be a real hard sell for a lot of people. They don't want that. They don't want that level of gameplay. That's too much.
I think that if you look at Dominions, it's like when you get to the point where you're gonna have to do 100 actions per army, like where you get these huge armies, the way to make that more fun is to figure out a way to do it in fewer actions, right? So one of the things you're doing in Dominions is you're putting a mage here, 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 that sucks. Nobody likes doing that.
Yeah.
But what if I could just have my mages arrange themselves in a block, right?
Yeah.
Or counting communions, or there are some things, but I think the thing is that Dominions sort of starts to fail a bit as you scale up the game, in terms of when you're managing 100 times the units, you shouldn't be needing to do 100 times the actions. I think this is a major thing for strategy games in particular, is that when you scale up, you should have, if you're managing 100 more units, maybe you do 10 times as many actions. It shouldn't be you need good mechanics, good UI mechanics to keep the game where you're basically, to keep it fun, where you're doing fewer actions. You need huge economies of scale, basically. And Factorio does this beautifully. That's basically the whole game of Factorio's economies of scale.
Yeah, that's a game about scaling. I'd suggest the developers go and read Sun Tzu, because Sun Tzu basically said the organization of the many is fundamentally the same as the organization of the few. It's just a matter of division. So maybe we can come up with a way of dividing decisions down in a cascading way. So almost like you got your general at the top, and he cascades his decision down to his brigadier generals, whatever, the next level rank down, and then they each make their own cascading decisions. I'm not talking about in a literal military sense, by the way. I'm talking about figuring out a way for the game to do this, so that you make, and then you can go, right, I'm telling this guy what to do. Well, you're doing that most of the time, but what about, okay, I'm going to insert myself here then and tell this guy what to do on a more broad level. And if I want to, maybe I go and talk to the individual troops, or the individual squad leaders, or Distant Worlds has some kind of way of doing this.
Yeah.
But I think this
if you
might
think
be...
about it, a lot of times these games start where you're this guy at the bottom, right? You've got a small squad.
Yeah.
And then later you have a few of these, right? And now you're playing a different person. Like in the army, you're playing this guy.
Yeah. So that makes sense.
Next time you're playing this guy. So the thing is that a lot of times they keep the same UI and controls, even though you're doing a different job. And it's like, how I think as a game, like scaling up is fun. It's fun having a ton more troops. It's fun doing all of that, but the controls you have should be different in a way.
Agreed.
So it's like, how do you manage it? I mean, that's we're making a game, so it's tricky stuff we're thinking about too.
Yeah,
But,
sure. It comes up a lot in the Explominate community, and we've got some dedicated UI developers there who talk about this. They say that a lot of the scaling problems with 4X are actually down to just how we manage it and the user interface that we've got, the tools that we've got. Now, I'm kind of famously a bit resistant to, well, no, kind of just sort of oblivious to UI problems because I've just been playing games since the 80s when UI design was crap, and so I just make do with whatever's there. But I'm starting to try to think about it a bit more now because, obviously working for a developer, I have to kind of like provide feedback on stuff, and also just being aware that it's a blind spot of mine I need to kind of fix. And I'm starting to see that argument that maybe, but I think it's not just about UI. You've kind of got to change the game. And there's a little bit of me that's a little bit resistant to the idea that the level, the further you go, hang on. So like the further you go towards the end of the game in terms of time, right? The further you get towards the end of the game, if the game has some arbitrary way of ensuring the player can only make more macro level decisions and reduces the level of stuff that they can do on the micro level, I'm not going to enjoy that. I mean, I might do if it's well done, but this is a challenge to a game developer. Make a game that I'm going to enjoy that. But I think that we found
the reason you would do it is because it makes your life easier, right? So like in Factorio, you could never use blueprints like people do. Sure. You could never use personal robots, but it's going to be a huge problem. You could try to build a spaceship without any automation, but it's like, oh my God, we've gotten to this new level. I can have factories that build it together, like to build all this shit for me. Like it's fun. So I think that's the challenge. I think Factorio is the gold shining star of how do you make it so that once your job changes, you're no longer managing a tactical troop? Like, how do you make it where it's exciting that you don't have to manage this anymore? Like, it would make sense. Like, if you think about just as a progression, if you're a squad leader, you're basically doing like Age of Wonders tactics, right?
Yeah.
Like, you should be controlling each unit. That's fun. But then when you have armies, you want it to also be fun when you're not the squad leader. Your job is you've got 4 different squads and you want them to behave intelligently. So like, what would you do if that's your job in the military? Like, you're going to be going over tactics. You're going to be assigning where they go, like the squad, and you're going to make sure they're like drilled and trained to do the right thing, and that they're going to have like a battle plan that maybe you lay out, but you don't execute. What is that? That's basically an auto battler, right?
Yeah.
And then you go up a level, and now it's like, okay, well, like this guy has like 6 of these guys. What job is this guy doing?
Yeah.
Okay, well, he's not doing the tactics. He's maybe deciding what kind of armies we recruit, but he's mostly doing like strategic position around the map, and these guys are doing it. But if you take this to like Dominions and you're like, you're going to take away my ability to script armies, now I can't script them because I'm this high up. Like, that would be kind of annoying. But then it's like, you would, like, using Factorio as an example, what do? You want it to be fun. You want it to be like, oh, well, this is just this is squad A and they've got a certain type, and this is squad B and they've got a certain type. And I'm not going to bother scripting any of them because they're just going to waste my time. I'm just going to say, hey, this guy, you've got 6 squads and you've got 3 A's and 2 B, or 2 B's and 1 C. And that's what it is, so you need these kind of things, I think, to make it where games are fun as they scale. But
I think with computer games, video games, we've got the ability now to simulate a whole lot of stuff. Okay. And it's quite possible that with this lower level, this squad level thing, at a certain point in the game, you automate that, right? So, we've got the, great. So we've got the low.
Here we go. Oh, okay, I'll put it back.
Thank you. So we got this stuff. You want to manually control it for a bit, and at any point in the game, you should be able to come back in and manually control this if you want.
Right.
But as the game scales up, you can manually control this guy, but it's also automated if you want. So up to the point of the game that you're at, I think this is what I would like. I started working on a design for a game that was basically like this, and it was going to be very complex, so I gave up on it because it was too much for a first game. But every entity in the game was simulated. So, and you know, it was very much like this subdivision. So at the army level, you could automate your armies, and then the game was looking at it just like, okay, well now we're on that scale of the game. The game kind of like zooms out and just deals with counters being pushed around. And it only actually the way that I had it designed was that the army is made up of individual squads or whatever. When it was your player, it would actually do, and you were looking at that battle, it would actually zoom in and look at the calculations of what everything did. But if it's just the AI players, it didn't bother. It just looked at the armies, and they just had a bunch of numbers like 3 attack, 4 defense. But that was abstracted from what's really going on, and it obviously kept a record of some of what was inside it. Some of the squads, some of the individuals, but only when you actually went in and looked at it to try and figure out what went on would it actually go through and calculate it. And so that was a little, an optimization problem I was coming up with. But I thought that was kind of interesting. So this is a way that you could do a very big game, something like Emperor of the Fading Suns, where you've got like, star systems. And then in each star system, you've got like, you've got planet, and in each planet might have continents, and in the continents you've got armies moving around. But if you really zoom in on it, you've got like, just a tactical battle map like you might have in Eodor or in, in Master of Magic or something, and you can actually watch the individual units. Now, very, very ambitious, way too much for me, but you kind of get the idea. Like that would be great because every aspect of that can be automated at various levels. So if you remember Dominion, Illwinter were talking about this game that they were doing called Trade and Taint or something, where you can, let's think about Mountain Blade. Yeah, Mountain Blade's a great example. Start off with one guy, and then you hire a few dudes, and then you got like 10 people, and then you move around and you do the fun stuff with 10 people, do a bit of trading, kill some armies, get some money. Then you've got like this bigger group, then you got this war band of about 40, 50. Then you got an army of about 200, blah, blah, blah. It scales up. And each level of it can be automated, just like you can in Mountain Blade. You can in Mountain Blade works like this actually. When you're a commander, when you're a king, you take on, or you control other leaders, and they are responsible for then going and building up their own war bands. If one of your nobles gets defeated in battle, what he'll do is he'll go back to his cities and he'll start raising troops again on his own, just like the player has to. This is why Mountain Blade's great, by the way. Because it simulates all this stuff. So actually, now I think about it, Mountain Blade's pretty much it's already doing what we're talking about.
Yeah, I haven't played that. I probably should.
Mountain Blade Warband and Bannerlord are both really good, man.
Yeah, I know people love it. I think another thing too, like I think if you look at Age of Wonders, to keep going back to this, but like if you think of it as an auto battler, because some people are like, oh, you can auto battle, you just hit the auto battle button and there it goes. I think the thing is like that's not really fun. Like you don't have, as a player, you don't have a ton of agency. Like, yeah, you chose the units that were in there. You choose your research. But like, is it really scratching the auto battler itch? Like,
well, the problem is you only have here's the issue with the Age of Wonders. Every battle's critical because so every battle's critical. You are encouraged to play every battle because
you'll take less
generally
losses.
speaking, all things being even in Age of Wonders, the larger army wins. It's really until later on. It's very difficult until later on, and I'm talking about 3 or 4 hours of gameplay, maybe a bit longer.
Yeah,
it's really difficult to win a battle against high-level opponents. Against larger amounts of opponents. Advanced players do, and there's some gameplay to be had in kind of attacking larger armies with smaller forces so that you can level them up better. That's a cool mechanic they've got in there, by the way. Very clever, I think. But it's not that effective, I don't think, especially for newer players who won't understand that. So every battle is really, really damn important, and you just don't have enough units in the game for that to be, for auto-resolve to actually be a viable thing. It's not like Total War, whereas if you auto-resolve a battle and you lose, like a battle that you don't really want to play, you might lose an army, but it might not necessarily be quite as catastrophic as it would be in a game like Age of Wonders, where if you lose a battle at the end of Age of Wonders, you're kind of done, aren't you? Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's I mean, that's because in Total War, like there's attrition. Like you could lose half a squad, but the squad grows back over time. So the attrition, there's like permanent attrition and temporary attrition in Total War.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. But I also think that, like, if you think about is the tactical combat in Age of Wonders fun? Like, sort of, yeah. Like, it's kind of fun. Like, it's fun
Yeah,
moving the
it is
guys
really
around,
fun,
doing
yeah.
back attacks and things like that. Then you say, is the auto battler fun? No, you don't really
No.
have much influence over it. If you gave the player auto battler tools, like I could script my army in some way. I could say like, okay, I want these people to try to focus on the same person, or go after closest, or like buff, like put this spell on this unit, like whatever it is, like something like Dominions, or like, I mean, there's a ton of auto battler games you can look for inspiration. But the thing is the player choice, like this guy who's now treating these squads as like auto battlers, right? Like, so he's telling them what to do and then they do it. Like, this is a fun job, like telling them
Yeah.
what to do. Like, there's direction coming from above. But if you just have a button and you're like, oh, there's an auto battle button, I've made this part of the game now. Like, that's not necessarily fun. Like, you have to figure out a way to make the tools at each level fun. So, and
Yeah.
that involves like having player agency where the players are getting a say in what's happening, so they feel ownership when they win the battle. Like, if I hit the auto battle button, I feel a lot more ownership if it's like kind of executing my script versus
Yeah, 'cause that's more
doing...
satisfying as well.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, there is something to be said for like Conquest for Elysium works basically by army composition, and that's
Right.
what the argument is. That's the argument that Age of Wonders fans will make about Age of Wonders. It's about the army composition, and I think it's deep. I think it's a bit deeper than we make out in that respect, actually.
Sure.
But still, and one thing's nice about Age of Wonders, at least you do get to watch the game play out, and that's a big thing. You know, you can go in and see what the AI is doing, and I think that's kind of fun in
Yeah,
some
no,
ways.
that's fun.
It's not the worst auto battler I've ever seen.
No.
I think in a lot of ways it's better than the one in Total War, actually. But I like your idea of auto battler tools in Age of Wonders. The issue is that I think you then need to increase the amount of armies that are going around on the field if that's going to be a major gameplay element. And I worry that the game's not designed for that. They've kind of artificially, they've as a function of it being this is what I mean, right? Age of Wonders is a kind of a bad design, right? Because they've put so much effort and energy into this tactical battle system, but so much of the other design works to take you away from playing it. So whether it's by this ridiculous decision they've made recently to increase the sponginess of all the units, which just further drags out the early game combat, but you have to play them on higher difficulty settings. Otherwise, even small casualties can be quite damaging to your game. It's really difficult. So you're sort of forced to play all those early battles, but they're bored. They're not that exciting. And so so many of the decisions in the game, particularly the expanded 4X elements of the game, they really take you out of the tactical combat stuff. Like, I find that I'm fatigued playing Age of Wonders. After a couple of battles, I'm done. Especially the big ones later on.
Yeah.
I feel like they are having great fun with the battles, by the way, later on, definitely. And I think it's a good fun. It's a really good tactical combat system they come up for the type of game. The problem is that so many other elements of the strategic games design push away from that. So I think it's a weird mishmash, and I think fans of the genre don't mind because they get it. They understand how they understand how that works for them, and they can, like me with the UI stuff that I don't always see. I've got a bit of a blind spot for UI problems. I think some people have got a bit of a blind spot for this idea that sometimes a game's design can work away from itself. It can work contrary to itself. Think about and
I think too. Sorry. I mean, because you and I've gotten some, heat, for not liking Age of Wonders as much as maybe we should, whatever that means.
Yeah, man, I get more hate for that than anything.
But it's I think the thing is, we're not even necessarily saying it's a bad game. We're just saying why it doesn't resonate with us. And I think when you look at it, you can look at a game and let's say it makes 1% of people happy. If it was a better game, maybe it would make 2% of people happy. I think you have to be careful when you try to make everybody happy, because then you make a horrible game.
Sure.
But you can make a game niche enough where you make 0.0001% of people very happy with it, but that's not a great game. If you're making the games on Steam that have 100% reviews with 20 reviews, even if they're not friends, it's the 20 people who played it thought it was the best game they've ever played. I don't think that's a good game. I think it's that there were major things that were wrong with it. You know?
So I think
I think
that's
our
okay.
feedback, even if we don't like it, is valid because we want to like it. you know?
Where I draw the line is when people kind of go, "You don't know what you're talking about." That bugs me because it's like, okay, just because you like a game and because I'm hyperbolic. I like to highlight the things that I'm saying.
Yeah.
My actual view on Age of Wonders, especially since we did that podcast with Daz, I went back and played it again and I enjoyed it much more. And now
good.
it's like Stellaris. I think Stellaris is a crap 4X game. But if you play Stellaris and approach it more as like a story generator or like an RPG game, it's actually quite fun. So I think there's a tendency for games analysts like us, right, to kind of look at things in terms of pure mechanics and try to mind read what you're supposed to be doing in that from the mechanics. The thing is, sometimes games can be bad design, but they can be really good fun. And so I'm willing to put my hands up and say I was wrong about some stuff about Age of Wonders without a doubt, but because I went back and played it and I actually saw the fun in it a little bit more. But there are but if you're looking at it from a pure level of game, is this good games design? Are there aspects of the games design that work actively against the core thrust of it, like putting diplomacy into Zephon? Yeah, that's actively working against the games design. Think about the original XCOM, yeah, when we're talking about lethality of stuff. In the original UFO game, everything in that game is so lethal that you have to have like dozens and dozens of units, really. And you never really you start getting attached to them because, your heroes, your soldiers have survived for multiple battles. And so you really start looking after them, but they can be killed at any moment. Like a grenade can just come out of the darkness and it wipes out half your squad. But because everything's so lethal, you kind of play around that, and you've got the tools to play around it. The way that Firaxis XCOM, the Firaxis remake tried to do this, so like, well, we want to make it more RPG like, and we want players to care more about the individual soldiers, so we're going to give them these elaborate level up trees and stuff. And we don't want things to be so lethal, so they kind of reduce the lethality of stuff. But paradoxically, they kind of fuck the game up, because if you, like with Age of Wonders, if you lose a battle with, if you lose a soldier in XCOM, Firaxis XCOM, towards the end of the game, your campaign's kind of over. It's so difficult to build them back up. So they tried to fix a problem that wasn't really there by making it, and it made it worse. Like, they made an arguably worse game, in my opinion. And I think that Age of Wonders makes multiple mistakes like this, where they actively work against the things that they should be funneling players into more of the tactical combat. Don't make the tactical combat more boring. That's a bad idea, because it's a tactical combat game. The guys who did what's that game, Star Sector, they knew this. They realized that they a lot of players play Star Sector like a 4X, and they get or like Mountain Blade, and they get a bit disappointed when they realize that you can't make a profit trading. But the developer said, if players just can make a profit by peacefully trading, the game gets really boring, and we want this to be a combat game. Everything in this game is designed to funnel you into combat. So the only way that trading is going to be profitable is if you have to do it by sneaking in the black market, and that is risky, and it risks combat, because everything funnels you into the combat, because it's a combat game with a strategic wrapper, like Age of Wonders is supposed to be. So anything that allows you to bypass the best part of the game, it's not good. And I think Age of Wonders is bad for that. Age of Wonders 4 particularly is really bad for that, because they added a lot of stuff in there that kind of funnels you away. Like when you see players, the meta becomes, oh well, I only play like 30% of the combat or whatever. It's like, is that a good game then? Really?
Yeah.
You put all that development time into that tactical combat system, and then people are only playing 20 to 30% of the battles? Really? I mean, at least with Total War, that you can at least stand on a hill, with a small army, and you're vastly outnumbered, but if you're really skillful, you can win that. Whereas in Age of Wonders, you can't do that. If you've got a tiny army, you're lost, because there's just not that much skill in it.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton of... There's not like hard counters and things like that you can really use the same way. And the things that you do, like to get the strong mechanics, those are big strategic level things, like the research you're unlocking. And there's not ways to like... And the spells, you're not even choosing which spells to put on them, because those are, again, globals for the most part. I mean, there are combat spells too, but... Yeah,
and look, it's fun. It's a fun game, but I just did a video on how it was hyperbolically called "Stop Making 4X Games," and the vibe behind that video was, try
The
to
vibe behind the
improve.
video was your music was too loud, man. I
Oh
tried
yeah, I know.
listening to that, and that
Oh,
was
that's
way
so
too
annoying
loud.
as well.
I clicked it
Sorry.
off after like a minute.
Yeah, actually, it improves greatly because I figured it out like about
Oh,
a few
okay.
minutes in. So after about a minute, there's a periods where it's a little loud, but sorry about that. It was just I got endless audio problems at the moment. So anyway, that
Yeah.
video. So the thesis behind that video was that when developers are making these games, 4X games particularly, they're sticking too closely to genres and they're trying to transplant mechanics that came from out of context of the games that they work very well in these games that were made in the 90s, because they're trying to catch the lightning in the bottle again of Civ or Master of Magic or Master of Orion, all these great games. And they think that they can do that by playing to a genre. Oh, we're making a 4X game, therefore we need diplomacy, espionage, blah, blah, blah. And they bolt these mechanics onto these new ideas that they've got with no kind of real understanding that those interlocking mechanics need to be super tightly made at the same time, self-contained in a game. And then you inevitably that it all breaks, so they start doing the band-aid games design with the arbitrary limiting mechanics for scaling or snowballing, whatever it is, because they realize that actually players are not having fun because they've not thought about it enough. And I think that this kind of ties into this a little bit, because you've got to make your game from the ground up self-contained. Don't watch this video and then try to look at a game like Emperor of the Fading Suns and go, oh, I know, I'm going to transplant that I'm going to make it so that you can only have a small amount of ships. That's going to limit snowballing. No, that's not going to work. It only works in the context of that specific game, because that game was very, very carefully designed over a long, long time, multiple iterations, like Dominions. So all of these things have got to be thought about in the context of the overall isolated game. Fuck genres, do you know what I mean? Just forget about that. Forget about genres and just make your game that's so that it is not fighting against its own games design with various elements. And scaling's a big part of this.
I mean, I think genres have some place, right? Because I think it's one of the things, like, you copy a great game. If you copy everything almost exactly, you'll copy a lot of really good mechanics. I think the thing is, people end up changing things and they don't know why they're changing it. Or you just think something's good, like, let's add RPG mechanics to the strategy game. Like, people love RPG mechanics. Like, we like progression, we like growing our units. The problem is in Dominions, I lose a big army, I don't really care. It's kind of a cost of doing business. But if everything in that army was like, oh no, it was my level 10 warrior, and then he had level 7 like infantry with him, and I can never replace that, then I'm like, rage quit the game. But this, like, there are some very minor leveling mechanics in Dominions, but they're small.
Yeah.
The important thing is, in a strategy game, things are replaceable, and that, like, goes back to this image. When you're down here in the squad, like, no, this guy down here, this is Jerry, and this is Tom, and this is Susie, and you don't want to lose any of them. They're special little snowflakes. By the time you come up to be like the major general of the army, you're dealing with statistics. It's how many people did we kill and how many did we lose. You don't care about Susie or John or anything like that. It's a different game. So by the time you zoom out to a strategy level, a lot of these mechanics which encourage attachment actually fight against you as a strategy game. Like, you don't want to rage quit when you lose 10 of your units. That's supposed to be the cost. Like, and you don't want to make a game that's a strategy game where you're managing thousands of units and you're incentivized to not have attrition. Like, what would that be? That would be horrible. Like, if you have thousands of units fighting, you should be losing a ton of dudes. That's how that game should work.
Now I think about it, Mountain Blade does this perfectly. It makes you care about those individual units on the individual level up to a point, and then when you've got like hundreds of units, you stop noticing them because you've got 100 of them. So and you stop when you do take attrition, in battles. You're just like, oh, I just noticed I lost that guy that I'd had since the start of the game, but you're not gonna save scum over that. Do you know what I mean? I think that deals with it really, really well in that respect.
Cool. Maybe I have to try that. One other thing I just wanted to mention on scaling and fun is that when you really embrace scaling, like, let's say you now have an army of 1,000 guys, that gives you better options for doing like big area of effect attacks. I know we were talking about that earlier, but like, I think there are ways, like anti-snowball mechanics with area of effect and those types of things, where it's like somebody's going to run at you with a ton of stuff. Now you can have anti-area of effect things, right? So I think when you have games at bigger scales, there's like with area of effect stuff, there's also like a different layer of like counterbalancing that, you know.
Sure.
Which
Think
is
about
kinda fun.
machine guns in World War One.
Yeah,
Like when machine guns came into World War One, how did that change the power scaling of large armies? Think about
changed
that.
it a lot. Trench warfare.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
I mean, area of effect and local level tactical stuff actually is a real big limiter on scaling, right? If it's if it's done in the
yeah,
right way. Hopefully, your game, has ways for the player to construct their own scaling limiters like that, like Dominions.
yeah,
Foul
yeah. I mean,
vapors. There's a good way of killing armies if you're not ready for it.
yeah. Somebody brings 1,000 troops. You've got like a handful of dudes and a foul vapors caster. You know, you might
Game over.
take the day.
Yeah.
And those sorts of things are fun, I think.
Yeah.
So I think it's important. Like, that's one of the things I think that makes Dominions great is that, you know, even if you're way up here, you're way higher than somebody else, and they're, like way down here, they can still potentially, you come at them with the dumb army, they can still take the day. And there's so many strategy games where that's not the case, where somebody comes at you with a 5 times stronger army, you're going to lose. Yeah. It's inevitable. It's physics. But in Dominions, there's magic.
There's magic, but here's the thing, right? So we've talked about snowballing as like this kind of potentially bad thing. We did touch on the fact that there are mechanics that developers put into games, like things like double win mechanics, in order to intentionally start the snowballing so that they win when the game starts becoming boring. Now, I'd still argue that's an issue with your game being a bit boring if you've got to do that. But I still think that can be fixed in your core design. Maybe I'm being a bit, maybe I'm being a bit optimistic. But the developers have come up with all sorts of cool ways to create snowballing effects. Like, for example, in Galciv, there's this Death Star kind of thing called the Terror Star. You can build a Terror Star, and that basically allows you to just waltz into an enemy planet and just eliminate it, which just destroys a big portion of their economy. So it's like, once you start getting those things, the game's kind of over, and it's just a fun way to make the game end, a little bit quicker with a thing that makes you feel like you're able to wield that power that you've spent all that time earning.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think Dominions does this too in a good way. Level 9 spells in Dominions are very strong, and they end the game. Or they throw the game out of balance. I think this is the way I'm thinking about it for the game I'm working on is, we're going to have a lot of rules that we make in a way. They're things that kind of keep the snowball, like this. There's going to be a lot of snowball mechanics, but they keep it fun, and there's counterbalances and stuff. Basically, you'll have some rules. But at the end of the game, like with final tech, you break all those rules. So, you have shit that like maybe there's like in Dominions, you need more, like one of the core game loops is you can't really get much more powerful than your land mass, right? To gain power, you need land. And if you lose all your land, you're going to lose all your power.
Yeah.
Things like Arcane Nexus and stuff break that, right? Like you can be a single province and maybe be the leader in gym income if you have Nexus. So, yeah. I think in general, like having some things like, oh yeah, you're going to need land to make power, or, like you can't make troops from nothing. Like you can't make troops without gold. Like that's kind of a rule, but like maybe there's a way to break that rule at the end of the game. That could be fun.
You're onto something with this pollution thing, by the way. I think you can use that. For example, let's say in your master, your Fantasy 4X game, the more death magic you use, the more it accumulates this kind of death aura around your empire, and it starts killing shit off. I mean, think about pollution mechanics or corruption mechanics, that kind of stuff. That is a really, really interesting way and thematic to put a natural limit on certain, not a natural limit, but to encourage the player in a soft way that there is consequences to their actions. So consequences, to player choices is something that really needs to be, I think it needs to be enforced in games, but whether you do it in a hard arbitrary way or you do it in a soft kind of nudging them, with kind of penalties way, whatever, that's also something that we should consider when we're thinking about these games. Because rather than just saying you can only cast 3 death spells a turn, how about, well, you can cast like, a load of death magic and summon all these skeletons and stuff, but it's going to have an effect on your economy because people are going to start getting sick and dying. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I think those things are fun.
Yeah,
We
that's
we
way
should
more
probably
fun than an
wrap up
arbitrary
though.
limit.
We're over 2 hours now.
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Shall we do closing thoughts?
But when did we lose Sean, by the way? Was that when I went out?
Is he totally gone?
He's totally gone, yeah. Just
Okay,
really,
damn.
he's probably. It's likely his kids.
I
woke
thought he
up
was just
saying,
being quiet, but no. Okay.
Thanks, Lucid Man. It's always
I-
great to talk about this stuff with you,
yeah,
man.
yeah. So here are my closing thoughts. I think in general, power scaling is tons of fun. Snowballing is tons of fun. I think that is like those, like having really like I think coming back up here, having huge effects from your actions where different effects are very different, so that like basically the more important the decisions you're making and the more effect it's going to have on how the game goes, and the more like you have the opportunity to do skill expression by doing different things and have like really crazy power progression, I think in general is good.
Yeah.
Like that's really fun. The problem is if you the more fun things you have like that, the more it's likely that the game is going to go like this, where this is one player and this is another, and then there's a third down here. And that is good, but by the time you're 30 minutes into this game, this player and this player, this guy's like a tribal nation with sticks that are sharp, and this guy's like shooting space lasers.
Yeah.
That's not going to be a fun military encounter. So I think the thing is that when you do this, you need to have ways that even though you have these fun mechanics and things are decisive, you have different things that help to keep things in the challenging zone without having really stupid, weird, hard limits. Like things like bumpers are good. Things like risk reward, where you're incentivized to be greedy and leave stuff behind so that you have the opportunity to have things turned around on you.
Yes.
Things like diplomacy, which tamp you down if you get too far ahead of the pack. Things like asymmetric zones, so maybe you're winning on military, but then you get ruined by assassinations. Comeback mechanics, if not overdone. So I think there's all these things you sort of find ways to put in. And I think the biggest problem is when you really try to say, hey, snowballing and getting too far ahead is a problem, and some of the choices we can make are too imbalanced. Let's try to balance everything. And you inevitably, if you get on this balance thing, like if you get on the balance track, your game is going to be put on rails. And the decisions you're going to make aren't going to matter a ton, and it's going to fucking suck. And so this is, I think, the smooth brain design thing that a fair number of modern strategy games have drifted in this direction, putting their game on rails, and it fucking sucks.
Yeah. And then they fix it with some of the other stuff. So they throw in comeback mechanics that are arbitrary and feel unfun. They put arbitrary caps on level scaling. They will, they'll just. This is what I mean. I've just put this thing in and said all of this has got to feel natural and lore friendly. And the way that you do that is that you bake it into your core design. Mm-hmm. Don't add this stuff as don't think about this after you've finished your game. Yeah. That's going to be a bad game. This might sound fundamental, and I'm sure more experienced developers are going, yeah, all right, Ben, you keep saying this, but we all do this. No, you don't. No, you don't.
Yeah,
I can count the number of well-designed 4X games on one hand. All right, really well-designed games that have thought about this stuff before they release the game. Yeah, the rest of them kind of bump into these problems and then throw some stuff on to try and fix it. Stellaris is a game that's entirely made of this.
Yeah,
they just add stuff. They go in and they it's like having a patient in a hospital. It's like, okay, we went in to give him a bionic arm, but we realized, oh, hang on a minute, we need to remove a couple of kidneys because he's got, or give him a triple heart bypass, and then people get pissed off because they've changed half the game, and I think it's all got to feel natural, and the idea of being lore friendly as well. I think if you're going to add stuff like combat mechanics or things like any kind of restraints or scaling, limits to scaling or anti-snowballing stuff, tie it into your lore, like pollution in Factorio. What a great way to do it. Or the various NPC factions in in Emperor of the Fading Suns. There's one that is there that kicks off an endgame crisis if you spend too much money selling and buying resources. So it kind of discourages you from excessively building a massive economy and trying to change that into money, right? That's one of the things that it's got. The other one is that if you rely too much on research, well, the church can come along and start giving you problems because they can start saying, well, that research, we're no longer allowing that. That's prescribed. So just law-friendly and interesting stuff that doesn't feel gamey, that feels kind of part of a... You think about it. Spend more time in design.
Yeah, I think the important thing here for me is that snowballing is good. Like, power progression is good. Balance is important in a way, but like focusing on it, I think is the wrong thing. Like, the game should be somewhat balanced, but if you're thinking about that, you're never going to make a fun game. You have to make a game where you're making cool shit. And if you make cool shit, maybe something's way overtuned, you pull it back in, something's too weak, maybe you amp it up. But like, the focus should be on making cool shit. The problem is if you make a ton of cool shit, then there's going to be a ton of skill expression. And the skill expression is going to lead to this and this. And then that's why you need, if you're going to have cool shit, you need to think about these things when you're starting the game. Like when you're like, how are we going to... And some of these, like... Honestly, if you just have good diplomacy in a free-for-all game where they're going to tamp down on you if you get too far ahead, in some ways, that one by itself can fix... I won't call it sins, because it's not sins, but it will fix all these other issues with scaling. Like, you still want to scale, but you just don't want to get too far ahead. So, I don't know.
A lot of developers seem to leave this to... Like, for example, one of the problems I find with Illwind... not with Conquest Elysium, but with Dominions is, I think all of the things being equal, the player with the largest amount of time on his hands is going to have an advantage, right? So one of the reasons why I tend to fall off in the late game of Dominions games when I get there is because I just don't have so much time, and I've got less energy to be able to play like a 3-hour turn or something, to script 10 battles with 100 mages in each, whatever. You get the idea. So I think that your limitation on skill expression, don't leave that just to the player with the longest amount of time in a turn-based game, because that's one thing I found that can be an issue with certain
well, I think that comes back to this scaling thing too, is that there's a limited amount of time you can like it also makes things less fun, right? Like when you're like, if you had a turn that was going to take 5 hours to do well, but you only have an hour, and so you're going to sub-optimize the turn, it also means that, like, still, like, even though there's, like, the combined action that still makes the scripting and stuff meaningful, it's, like, still the value of each action is less. Because it's like, if you macro well and you just have armies, even if they're not scripted right, you can still win at some point, even when you... Like, almost every game I win in Dominions, by the end, I'm not microing stuff the same way I normally would.
Yeah.
Because I just don't need to. And it's like, if I can win without doing that, then I'm going to.
I guess that's a natural snowballing thing then. Maybe Dominions has got it quite right in that respect.
Yeah. All right, this was fun.
Yeah, thanks, man. I think we chewed over this one pretty well. It's a shame we lost Sean. I think he's probably just busy.
Too bad.
But yeah, nice one, man. Thank you very much. And
All
to everyone listening, thank you so much for listening along. I like these deep dives. I think we can really chew these things over. I think just something I did want to say. I think a lot of people come onto YouTube and perhaps they feel that maybe they're watching stuff in order to get opinions from other people, right? And I want you to know, I can have some, like me and Lucid both can have some quite strong opinions on stuff, but I'm not there to go, my opinions are the correct ones, right? I talk about this stuff because I'm trying to chew this stuff over. I really want to get to the bottom of it, and I'm not married to any of my opinions, okay? So, whether it's Age of Wonders or whether it's some other like thing that I kind of rant about, I'm not married to any of these opinions. So please, if you think that we've got something wrong, come and say so. Try and do it in a polite way, okay? But like, the politer, if you're polite, I'm more likely to respond. But I really like it when people challenge me, because there's been a whole bunch of times recently when we've done one of these videos, on whether it's on my own channel or whether it's on Meta Abuse, where people have gone, no, you're wrong about that. That's why I like doing tier list videos, Lucid, because if you do a tier list, you'll quickly get people who they'll pick up, no, oh no, you've got that game wrong, man. Like what do you mean you've given Eodor Genesis a C tier? No, that's an A tier game. Go and play it again.
Did you
And
put
it's the
it in
same with
C?
this kind of thing.
I didn't see your tier list.
I
You
did
put it in
originally
C?
years ago
Oh,
for
you fucker.
Explorminate because I didn't.
no.
I'll be honest, I didn't play it enough. But now
Yeah.
I gave it a high. I think I gave it a high B tier, like top end of B, which for me is good,
Yeah.
by the way. I don't really play
Yeah.
bad games, but now I've played it again after you recommended it. I was like, oh no, it's not S tier. It's a little bit too loose for that, but
yeah.
it's high. This is A tier game, man. This is like really
It
good.
is good.
But anyway,
It's
so
really
that's
good.
the point I want to make. Like, come and talk about it, and argue away and tell us where we've got this wrong, or tell if we've got this right, or if you're an expert, if you're a games designer or you're in the industry or you're just someone who's interested, let us know what you think about our analysis here. Is there stuff we're missing? Because I think that's really that's the way to that's the best. Apart from this being entertaining, yeah, this is the best thing that we can get out of it. Because I'm not here to go, I know everything, because I don't. I'm just a guy fucking on the internet. I don't do this.
I don't think we've been given like divine prophecy of how things should work or anything, and we certainly make mistakes. But on the other hand, I think that first of all, I think not everybody's going to like the same game, but
Sure.
so like there are different strokes for different folks. But I do think that there's like a sense, like being sensitive to joy, I think is like a thing. And like, if you think of a World of Warcraft player that's used to logging in, doing the grind, in some ways they get turned into a slop eater. Like there's certain things with, and that probably pissed people off. Sorry. But like, there's certain things where either just like currents in the industry or things that become normalized, there's slop that ends up getting pushed and people just get used to being slop eaters.
Yeah.
And it kind of sucks. And then you get games, there's all the predatory monetization and stuff too. And games get sort of making slop. So I think some of this, like when you hear us being critical of something, or me being critical of something, like even if it's a game that was good, like Age of Wonders 4 was made with a ton of passion and stuff. And when I'm poking holes in it, it's not because I don't like it. It's not because I'm trying to hurt the company. No. It's not anything like that. I'm trying to be sensitive to joy and trying to figure out like, okay, wait, if I'm playing it and it's not fun, why is that? Why am I not able to get this when it was a game I grew up playing? I should love it. Like, what are the things? And it's like being sensitive to that, like, and being able to articulate it and give word to it, I think is how you figure out how like to make games better. And I'm not just a critic, I'm trying to make one. So it's like, that's part of the process for me. So it's not like, I think the thing that I'm trying to say is criticism isn't like hate. No. It's trying to be sensitive to what's good and what's bad so that we can give better articulation to it. And, for developers, it's useful if they're, if any developers are watching this, then maybe it can help them be more in touch with their own sense of joy and what things are good or bad, or some of the logic behind some of these things. And if it's just you as a gamer, there might be a feeling you've had like, oh yeah, I played this game too. And this really resonated with me, or this didn't, but maybe you didn't know why. And so that's the reason for it, I think.
Yeah, think about it like nurturing a relationship with someone. Sometimes you got to say, "Hey, I got a problem," but you're kind of coming at it from the perspective of, "I want to make things better," and we get unparalleled reach into the industry, by the way, for various reasons, which I won't go into now. But we've got unparalleled reach into the industry compared to most genres. Because the strategy games genre is relatively small. A lot of developers are very in strategy and 4X and stuff are very tuned into what each other's doing. A lot of the AA, developers are on the ground level talking to other games designers. They like to look at what other people are doing. So people do listen to these. And, amongst the 90% of crap that I'll come out with, they might find one nugget of gold every now and again. And even if it's just to stimulate debate, they might be like, well, Ben was wrong about this. But there's an overarching issue he's missing that we do need to talk about. So, thanks, Lucid. Enjoyed that.
All right. See you guys.
See you later, guys. Take care.